You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Is labor in solidarity fighting right to work? The answer is a astounding yes.
Wisconsin AFL-CIO President Phil Neuenfeld. Wisconsin workers are mobilizing against the anti-union right-to-work bill being fast-tracked through the state legislature this week by Republicans. Rallies are set for Tuesday and Wednesday as the state Senate takes up the bill in an extraordinary session of the state legislature, a move designed to limit debate and speed passage of the anti-union bill. Neuenfeld says this bill will hurt all workers, not just union members.
Right to work is an attack on all Wisconsin families. Right to work cripples of all workers to join together, stick together, and have each other's back in the workplace. When solidarity is eroded, it's the entire middle class who suffers. Collective bargaining and unions help set the standards in terms of wages and working conditions for all workers in a community. And unions provide essential training and knowledge with apprenticeship for workers.
UFCW 1473's John Iden appealed to Republican senators to vote their conscience on this bill.
Make no mistake, this bill is going to affect not only union members, but non-union members. Everyone's wages are going to be reduced as a result of this. And I encourage Republican senators to have courage to vote against this and not rubber stamp it.
By attacking union automatic dues paycheck deductions, backers of the bill are trying to defund and thus weaken unions. Betsy Kippers is president of the Wisconsin Education Association Council, which lost collective bargaining rights in the 2011 Act 10 legislation.
This will not bring in new workers and more people to work. We already are seeing in educators, people are leaving the state because they're not respected and their value is not being reflected in being able to have a voice in what's important to give us a strong education system. And this will take away the voice of what's important to make sure we have good paying jobs, good safety regulations, and good training for all of the high quality workers in Wisconsin.
A new National Employment Law Project report says paying home care workers $15 an hour would not only put $16.5 billion in their pockets, but would add tens of thousands of new jobs to the U.S. economy. Home care workers pushing for $15 in a union are organizing town halls across the country to help energize their campaign. The NELP report says that $6.6 billion in economic activity would be added to our economy if home care workers were paid $15 an hour.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, healthcare, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They bring down, but they still rock on. Go ahead, this time is my time. Alright, love or hate, it don't matter. So I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my time.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. The next phase in the No Rights at Work agenda, front and center, as we've been saying for a while. And you go back to just about now, 4 years ago, when we were in Wisconsin saying, you know what, all of this stuff is a national plan. It's a national plot. It's a scheme. It's a conspiracy. And I remember at the time going, no, it's not really a conspiracy because the right wing's very open and honest in their disdain for working people. And last night I got a bunch of emails from folks, sending me, oh, the Koch brothers run the, Mitch McConnell said the Koch brothers run the Republican Party. And I'm going, you needed Mitch McConnell to tell you that. And, maybe now there's an awakening. I've had some email conversations back and forth with people going, oh, well, we didn't realize it was, we thought, you thought, really? This is what happens when you give all the power to a handful. They grab more and more and more and more. It's never enough. Their insatiable appetite for more, never over. And what's going on in Wisconsin now, as there are thousands of people in the state capitol right now, as they're trying to find a handful of reasonable, rational Republicans to go, you know what? This is a bit extreme. This is throwing us back 100 years. And there's part of me that goes, maybe this is what has to happen. Because in the private sector right now in this country, we are almost at the level of unionization as we were when it was illegal. I mean, we're almost right there. I think it was like 5%. We're at 6.5, 6.6. And you go, as that number continues to dwindle and we move further away and further away, I think people it goes out of their head that there's a tool to grow the middle class. Later in the program, we're going to talk about the 35-year wage stagnation and I argue decline. A good number of industries in this country, especially the ones where people work with their hands and build stuff, they have seen their wages decline each and every year. And I keep waiting for that epiphany. I keep waiting for that collective aha. I keep waiting for it as each one of these death of 1,000 paper cuts continue to erode and deteriorate the labor movement. Will labor be dead after tomorrow if Wisconsin passes this right to work? No. It's going to change the way things are a little bit. It's not going to be dead, but it's going to make it a whole hell of a lot harder. And it's going to make those obstacles a whole lot higher. And when you look at, this is what gets me. The moneyed interest in this country and the control they have of our state houses and the control that they have of our federal government and the control that they have of our electoral process. It should be scaring every working person in this country because I got to tell you, as the labor movement continues to dwindle and shrink, and as the number of dues-paying members continues to shrink, as this assault continues, because understand the next step after you've outlawed and after you've made it impossible to negotiate and after you've put all these hurdles and obstacles and roadblocks and pitfalls and these sinkholes, after you put all this stuff around it, there's only one direction you're ending up. And that's with lower wages, less health care, less benefits, and a lower standard of living. That's reality. And how and why we as working people in this country haven't had that moment of, it's been, here we are, going on 7 years and since the great collapse, and yet wages are worse off. I can't tell you how many people I talk to who say, I'm making less money than I did in 2008. And the prices of things keep going up. I'm falling further and further behind. I'm working harder and harder. Things are getting more difficult. I fear for my children. I can't tell you how many of these conversations I have with folks. And the answer that we're given, and this is where, the right wing of this country is just masterful. That in pointing out, it's government that they're the problem. It's those welfare cheats. No, not the ones on Wall Street. No. Look to the urban inner cities. It's those people. And I get this stuff time and time again. And the reality is until we have that collective moment, And I guess, maybe we have to have that Great Depression moment again. Maybe we need to have these mini booms and busts where the wealthy get wildly wealthy. And then they lose a bunch and we lose everything and we bail them out. Maybe after a number of these happening one right after another. Maybe that's when we'll come to this moment. Because I go back and in my reading of the big explosion of workers into unions came after it was legal, one, and after Roosevelt gave and signed the Wagner Act, after the National Labor Relations Act, which gave workers some rights. And I've had so many arguments with people who want to argue that the employers have rights too. Yes, all of them. The National Labor Relations Act gave a few rights to workers. Not all of them, but a few. They get to sit near the table and have discussions and negotiate, and gave them the right to strike. And there used to be a number of strikes going on in this country because people were fighting for better wages, hours, and conditions. And every time they won something, everyone else gained a little bit as well. And my grandparents' generation, my grandfather, and I've told this story a number of times. When I moved in after my mother passed away and I moved in with my grandparents, he told me, the guy over there, caddy corner, he's got you stay away from those, no good for nothings. And he just said, if I see you over there, I'm going to beat you. And that was pretty simple for me. I understood beatings and I never played with the kid. And, a number of years later, I go, what was that all about? And he said, look, the guy's a scab. He crossed a railroad picket line 100 years ago or wherever it was, and he was basically ostracized. And what did the railroad picket have to do with my grandfather? Actually, when the railroad was on strike, the trucks actually did better, and he actually got more work out of it. If you think about it the way people think today, and he said, no, if their conditions get worse, my conditions get worse. And if my conditions get worse, theirs get worse. He understood on a fundamental level, on a visceral level, this idea of an injury to one is an injury to all. That if you allow this guy to get screwed, it's going to ripple effect across the entire industry and other industries. We seem to have forgotten that. We've forgotten that working class solidarity, that idea that we are really honestly and truthfully all in this together. And if you allow one guy to be exploited, eventually it turns around and it bites you in the behind. So when I see yesterday that out of the Senate Government Committee here in Pennsylvania, the chairman, Mike Fulmer, he got out of his committee this constitutional amendment to make it illegal for workers and their employer in the public sector, which would be the state, to deduct dues from these workers' paychecks. It's illegal to negotiate this if this passes. Now, understand, the reason they went the constitutional amendment route, pretty simple. They wanted to go around Tom Wolf because Tom Wolf said it's stupid, it's a waste of time, and he's going to veto it. So as my understanding is, in my conversations, this is not going to go anywhere on Wolf's desk, and they know that. So this is an end run around Wolf. It'll be interesting if it does pass in 2 consecutive sessions. It'll be interesting to see how much the Koch brothers and how much the billionaire class spend on it on the election because it's going to have to be voted on by we the people. It'll be interesting to see how many billions they'll put into Pennsylvania to push their agenda. To me, that's the interesting part of this. It was a party line vote. 6 of the 7 Republicans voted for it. All 4 Democrats voted against it, and only Dominic Pileggi voted against it in the committee. Now, I guess it goes to the full Senate. So we'll find out what happens there. But again, nothing good here, and an awful lot of wasted time, energy, and resource. But it is their ideology, and it is what the string pullers want. The next phase of the No Rights at Work agenda. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Dave Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13. Stick around. Right back.
You know eternity can't ever change might never change your mind. So think before you die. Whoa, think before you die.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1919. The U.S. Congress passed the child labor tax law. At the turn of the 20th century, child labor had increasingly become an issue of concern in the United States. In 1890, the census found more than 1 million children between the ages of 10 and 15 in the workforce. By 1910, that number had exceeded 2 million working children. Many of these children worked long hours in unhealthy conditions for low wages. Progressive activists led campaigns to bring national attention to the plight of these working children. As a result, many individual states passed limits on children's work. Nationally, there was no uniform legislation. Southern lawmakers were unwilling to push for child protections because local factory owners insisted child labor was necessary if Southern businesses were going to compete with manufacturers in the North. The state laws that did exist were poorly enforced, especially in Southern states. In 1909, a survey of South Carolina mills found that nearly 92% of them were violating what little child labor regulations were in place. In 1916, the U.S. Congress attempted to regulate child labor, but a federal judge ruled that legislation unconstitutional. Undeterred, Congress tried again in 1919. They passed a law that said companies in certain industries would face a 10% tax on their profits for hiring child labor. The act defined child labor as any worker under the age of 16 in any mine or quarry and under the age of 14 in any mill, cannery, workshop, factory, or manufacturing establishment. Within a few years, the Supreme Court found that law unconstitutional. In an 8-1 decision, the court ruled that Congress could not use taxes to enforce regulatory power. Although it was only in effect briefly, the child labor tax law did cause a downturn in the use of child labor. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Standing tall against a multinational corporate agenda. The Rick Smith Show.
Walker is Mubarak, Madison, Cairo, fascism track, next stop Ohio. Trying to kill labor, that's their jihad, huh? What's gonna happen when the people all rise up? Sad thing is, so we all labor. What you expect to hear? Billionaires on the papers. Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. And, as I've been saying, I remember 4 years ago when we were in Wisconsin saying, look, at the end of the day, this is a national agenda. This is not just one wacky governor who's got it. I'm going to try something. No, this was the plan, the edict from above. And it went across the country in 2011, and it's not going to let up. And the only reason that we're not seeing the same kind of assault on working people here in Pennsylvania is because at least we were able to elect a governor that has some bit of rational thinking and able to get rid of the right-wing Corbett. But trust me, Corbett wins re-election. We're Wisconsin. So this idea that, we're not them yet, we could be. And I look at what went on in the Senate yesterday as out of the Senate State Government Committee, they pushed out what is, I guess, a constitutional amendment. This paycheck deception, destruction, what they call protection thing, that they're now going to go around the governor and try a different way. But here to talk a little bit about it, I've asked Dave Philman. He's Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13. Dave, thanks for taking time for us.
No problem, my friend. And what a world it is right now.
So I'm looking at this constitutional amendment. This just seems to me to be an end round around the legislative process.
Exactly. I think they know publicly Mr. Wolf is not supportive, Governor Wolf is not supportive of this type of scam that's to take away the working folks' voices, which is mainly the unions. It's to obviously hit it where it hurts the most, and that's the source of revenue that we have. There's no doubt about it. So, yes, I mean, Rick, I mean, the thing is, of all the problems we have in the state of Pennsylvania, and obviously there are numerous ones, if it's jobs or whatever, the kind of shenanigans they're doing over there right now to tie up our legislative process to pass a constitutional amendment to stop unions from deducting dues or whatever that may be from paychecks, which costs nothing, almost nothing to the taxpayers, is truly a waste of everybody's time. And I wish it's never going to happen, but I wish they would feel ashamed that they are taking up taxpayer resources. Now they're getting paid to do this to circumvent what has been in place for over 40 years with a process that's negotiated between employers and unions, which has never been a problem whatsoever. It's suddenly become a problem with the legislature.
Well, as I've been saying for a while, this is just pure Machiavellian politics. This is taking your political enemy in the public square and attempting to gore them, and nothing more, nothing less. This isn't being cynical. It's just the reality of a very, very divided government that we have.
Exactly, and that's it's so blatant at this point. But unfortunately, some of those policies that are here in Pennsylvania and in some states across the nation are now just almost the norm on a daily basis. We've also something similar in Illinois with the new Republican governor who has tried through an executive order to stop the what he calls as unfair share deductions from state employees' paychecks, and that is the agency fee or fair share deductions that are occurring. Again, doesn't stop, it doesn't create any jobs, doesn't put money back into the budget, doesn't do anything except poke us in the eye to try to shut us down. And as you indicated, it started all off in Wisconsin a couple of years ago. But guess what? We're still there. We're still doing what we do. We're not going to go away no matter what they try to do at this point in time. But we're hoping that this does not see the light of day here in the state of Pennsylvania, especially for their tactic of using the Constitution to put something like that out there. It's truly embarrassing.
So explain to me how you see that how you think they think this is going to work. Now I understand it has to pass 2 legislative sessions, right? And then it goes to a vote. We're talking a long-term process. This just seems to me, and this is being a little cynical, that this is just a way to get into the Koch brothers and the wealth class's pocket to keep bringing money into the party in this state.
Exactly. And that's to advantage the corporate interests that, want to make sure that we don't exist ever again. And, again, we speak for the working class, not just our members, but anybody that's in the working class here in the state of Pennsylvania. So the way I understand it, you're absolutely right. It has to pass through 2 legislative sessions, which is 2 years worth of passage. And then it goes on to a ballot for approval. There is one right now that is being going through the process. It has to deal with nonprofits and their tax exempt status. That is probably going to be on the ballot this November as far as a constitutional amendment. And they're trying to use that process, as you indicated, to avoid a veto from Governor Wolf, which they don't have a 2/3 vote to override his veto. So again, tying up the legislative business that could be done for more important things to help every taxpayer in the state of Pennsylvania for whatever cause that may be. This does absolutely nothing, and it's just a waste of our time and our energy as we go forward. So You framed it correctly. This is just a way to get around the governor and do something which is purely to the advantage of the corporations and the Koch brothers that would want to see us shut down.
But here's the thing that gets me. This last election, I believe the mandate was very clear. As a state, we care about education. As a state, we believe we should be taxing the drillers to help fund education and rebuild our infrastructure. This does none of that. And my frustration is, while we're talking about this and while we're spending all of this energy and this time and this money and all of these resources to fight this, all the other things are still not being done.
Exactly. This is exactly the diversion, and to be the first priority of this new legislature, to put a constitutional amendment that does not help with the education, doesn't help the revenue stream, which we need so sorely because we've been cutting back for so long. This does absolutely nothing to advance anyone's causes other than the fact that they want to shut us down. And again, it's a waste of not only our time and energy as far as this goes, but now it goes out into the general public for folks to be concerned about where are we going to be with this voting on this process of a constitutional amendment, where we could be passing constitutional amendments that would help advocate more jobs in Pennsylvania, more education funding, but we're wasting our time on this.
I mean, for me, the constitutional amendment that I think we should be pursuing is getting money out of politics, not figuring out how we get more into.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we could, again, there are so many things that we could use this process to do, and now we're using it for frivolous issues where we're just trying to jerk around a certain segment of working class people. And again, it's outrageous. It's a waste of time, energy, and money. But this, I guess, is how the new legislature is thinking. And I'm hoping at some point in time it gets shut down.
So let me ask you about the prime sponsor, Senator Scott Wagner, who we've invited on this program a number of times to talk about this issue, to no avail. We've never actually gotten a response out of his office on whether he would be willing to come on and defend this. And I don't think he would, because the reality is, I would ask him that basically, look at the business that you ran for years and all of the tax dollars that were guaranteed to you just for you being in the neighborhood. I see kind of a hypocritical scenario here.
You've hit it right on the head. This is the even more bizarro area of this issue, is that he is using taxpayer resources to get his bills paid because he provides trash services, waste management services to townships and boroughs throughout South Central Pennsylvania. And this is where he gets his money, is because he is using the taxpayer resources to either send the bills out or advocate that he is getting the business that he is. And but on the other hand, he's now saying that's okay if I can have those services provided to my business, but let us not use something which is just a payroll deduction, which costs less than $100 a year for all 60,000 union employees for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which is minimal, obviously, in anybody's book, including the fact that some of our contracts have language that says we'll pay for the costs of the services if necessary. Never have we got a bill in over 40 years for an employer to say this is onerous, that we can't afford to do this. So, yes, the hypocrisy is all over the place, Rick.
So here's what gets me. I mean, this is the very first priority. So I got to ask the next question, which is this the political payback for all that Wagner did in getting a senator elected and all of the money that he's brought into the political process? Is this the quid pro quo? Is this, hey, you're the powerful guy now. We'll do what you want. Is this him taking over the some portion of the Senate?
Well, he sure has tried to bully himself around through the Senate. He was successful, if you want to put it that way, not him himself, but he was not fond of Senator Pileggi, who was the leader in the Senate, had him removed and brought in the new Senate leaders. So to say that he's trying to push his way around, it would appear that way. You're never going to hear the words come out of his mouth that I'm only doing this because the folks that I was supporting, labor was on the other side. that will never come out. They'll just use those code words, taxpayer resources, the ideology of having deductions done, whatever that may be. But we clearly understand and know exactly where this guy is coming from.
Yeah, and I look at this, and I guess the last line of questioning I have for you is out of any crisis, out of any one of these situations comes an opportunity. Isn't this an opportunity for labor to stand up and say, we're under attack for a reason? This is ridiculous. This is just dumb. Why are they coming after average everyday working people? And maybe have an opportunity to reach out to people and say, this is the reason they want to attack us, because we raise wages, we make conditions better, we get people health care and retirement security and those things, and maybe an opportunity of a rebirth, if you will.
And Rick, we don't just advocate for our members. We're on the front lines when it comes to workers' compensation reform, unemployment compensation reform, minimum wage increases, which doesn't affect our members. Health care for everyone. We're really ahead of that. And the other part of it is, and this is the scenario that's working its way, is first they started in the public sector employees, and then they try to get the private sector to say, well, that doesn't affect us. Thankfully, in Pennsylvania, we're all behind any attacks on any of us, if it's public or private sector. But that scenario is working its way in Wisconsin. When Governor Walker out there took away the benefits and rights of public employees, he didn't touch the private sector. Now they're coming up with right-to-work legislation in Wisconsin, which is going to affect the private sector. So once he got done the public sector, whispered in the private sector and said, "We don't worry about it." Now it's them too. So you can bet your bottom dollar that this whole legislative process is not just public employees now. It's going to be everybody else, unions, and then they're going to go after working class.
As I've always said, we're all in the Shark Tank. It's just right now, public sector workers are the flavor of this month, but eventually the shark gets hungry for all of us.
Exactly right. And we're just hoping we can stop this stuff. Again, have the legislature look back and reset themselves and work on stuff that's going to help bring some more revenues to Pennsylvania, help the jobs stay here. Those are the kinds of things we should be dealing with.
There you go. Dave, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much, and keep up the fight.
And you too, Rick. Thanks.
Our good friend Dave Philman, Executive Director, AFSCME Council 13. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We gotta get organized. We gotta do it today. No more mindless confusion. No more disarray. We gotta get organized.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Some say the blast sounded like a bomb and felt like an earthquake.
Another day, another oil explosion, this time at Exxon refinery in California.
The intelligence assessment describes some anti-pipeline and anti-oil sands activists as violent extremists.
Anti-petroleum activists are a security threat, says Canada. January 2015, the second hottest January on record. Plus,
the best idea we ever had. Our belief that the country's most special places should belong not just to the rich, not just to the powerful, but belong to everybody.
President Obama designates 3 new national monuments.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Just one more day of oil in trouble.
Yep. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, earlier this week we reported there were 2 oil train derailments in North America. We need to issue a correction. In fact, there have been 3 in the past week.
Yes.
And just as I predicted, by the way, as the fire is still smoldering in West Virginia from that huge oil train explosion out there, Keystone XL pipeline proponents are once again claiming that this is why we need to build the pipeline. Here's Fox News, of course.
Proponents of Keystone XL say their pipeline would get oil to market cheaper and far safer than the trains.
Now, in fact, oil transport by train has exploded in this country, pardon the pun. Back in 2008, there was only about 10,000 train cars. Now, as of 2014, about 500,000 of these oil train cars are crisscrossing the country.
So, wouldn't it be safer to build the pipeline?
No, you're right. Oil train traffic has increased 4,000%. But as far as total amount of oil spilled, pipelines still spill about 3 times more.
So even though shipment by oil bomb train has boomed over the past 6 years, as far as the environment goes, pipelines are still far more dangerous.
Overall, yeah.
Someone needs to tell Fox News. I'm sure they're waiting to hear it. And speaking of oil explosions, what do you have for us today, Desi?
Well, for the second time in a week, the oil industry was involved in a major explosion and fire near people's homes. A huge explosion on Wednesday destroyed sections of a 100-year-old Exxon refinery in Torrance, California.
How old?
107 years.
And it's still in operation.
Yes.
Giant flames visible for miles, the ground shaking felt for miles as well. An explosion rocked this Torrance refinery, ripping apart structures and crushing cars.
Only minor injuries were reported. 13 schools near the refinery were ordered to shelter in place for several hours because what else are they going to do? Air quality was affected, but officials said it stayed within acceptable limits. The explosion measured the equivalent to a 1.7 earthquake on the Richter scale. The cause of the blast is still under investigation.
Here's the cause. Oil blows up. Just saying.
In Canada, a leaked intelligence memo from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police calls Indigenous tribes and environmentalists who oppose oil and gas development a growing threat to Canada's national security.
The intelligence assessment describes some anti-pipeline and anti-oil sands activists as violent extremists.
The January 2014 report lumps all groups against the oil industry together, describing them as a highly organized and well-financed anti-Canadian petroleum movement.
See, I knew you were a terrorist.
They called them anti-Canadian. Canada's Conservative Harper administration is currently pushing to expand broad anti-terror legislation to include anybody who interferes with, quote, critical infrastructure or the economic and financial stability of Canada, and even allows preventive detention of people who might do something.
It's long been said, when the U.S. sneezes, Canada catches a cold. It sounds like Canada has caught the flu. I'm sorry, Canada.
And disturbingly, that secret memo also questions the science on global warming.
Naturally.
Here in the U.S., the FBI is ramping up monitoring of anti-Keystone XL pipeline activists at their homes and workplaces.
Oh, hello, FBI.
Meanwhile, the planet is still warming. After 2014 clocked in as the hottest year on record, the month of January in 2015 was the second hottest January on record, according to NASA and NOAA.
Those liars.
President Obama this week used his executive authority to protect 3 new national monuments from development for all Americans. Browns Canyon National Monument in Colorado, Hanaolioli Internment Camp in Hawaii, and the Pullman Historic District of Chicago, prompting one congressional Republican to call him King Obama.
Of course he did. As Obama himself noted,
conservation is a truly American idea.
Yeah, back when we had Republicans like Teddy Roosevelt and, even Richard Nixon.
Yeah, back when conservatives actually believed in conservation.
For much more on those stories and all of them that we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, and iTunes, where we hope you will give us a good review, and that helps other people find our reports easier. Find us and follow us on the Facebook and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Is this land made for you and me? This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island. From the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm going to this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery for this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascists are bound to lose?
I hope so. Gotta tell you, I hope so. I look at someone like Scott Wagner. And, the idea of fascism was the melding of government and business. The train's running on time. Your trash being picked up on time. And, of course, one guy making a ton of money off of it. I mean, stop and think about, this guy's business, this Senator Wagner. I had someone during the break email me and say, what are you talking about with Scott Wagner? Evidently, you haven't been listening. Now's the time. Scott Wagner ran a trash company. And through his contracts with different municipalities, the municipalities guaranteed him every customer in the city. For instance, I have a trash company that I have no choice. I have to pay them. I can't go with my neighbor and say, hey, let's go in on a can, since I have one bag a week. You have one bag a week. And hey, that guy down there's got one, that guy over here. The five of us are going and we'll pay one can. You can't do that. Every person has to pay. No matter how much you have, you have to pay. And it goes to people like Wagner. And if you don't pay, then you get the nasty, evil letter from the township or your city or whatever. That says, if you don't pay, we're going to fine you. And you'll have to go to court. And if you don't pay, then we'll take your house. And now you've got this guy who's benefited from this system that he, I'm sure, helped to lobby to create. Now saying that, workers and their employers can't sit down and come to an agreement. That to me is just the height of hypocrisy. And you've got people like Wagner. And understand, this is the very first priority of the Republican Party right now. This is it. This is priority one. And I keep trying to get to my Republican friends and go, this is what your party is doing to this country. That's their priority. Lowering your wages, less health care, less pension, worse working conditions. That's the goal. Deregulate, deregulate, deregulate. That doesn't help you. And I think on some level, a lot of my Republican friends like to think that it doesn't mean them. I've got a lot of union member friends who are Republicans, and again, the gun thing, but they're not talking about me. They're talking about those lazy stiffs over there. No, they're talking about you. They're talking about your job. They're talking about your family. They're talking about your ability to put food on the table. That's what they're doing. They're talking about taking us back 100 years. And you look at today, a little over 100 years, 107 years ago. U.S. Supreme Court upheld the Oregon restriction on hours for women because, it could harm women. No more than 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, 70 hours a week. That's it. Can't do any more, or you'll get a $10 fine. But just a couple of years later in Lawrence, Massachusetts, those same women who had their pay cut because of maximum hour laws, they were beaten by police on this day in Lawrence, Massachusetts, them and their children, for having the audacity to protest the low wages and the sped up lines. Because if you can't work 100 hours a week, we're going to put 100 hours into several hours. And also today in labor history, the new federal child labor law was passed, and it was declared unconstitutional a couple years later, but it was passed this year today in 1919. Again, the corporatists of that era ruled that we want children in the mines. And I keep saying we're going back to that. Also today, 1939, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that sit-down strikes were illegal. How dare workers use an organizing tool and a tool to make their lives better? Unconstitutional, illegal. And we're going to have to fight these fights again because of people like Wagner, because of people like Scott Walker, because of the Koch brothers and their ilk. But I got to go. When do we wake up? Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about what's going on with the steel workers and day 24 of the oil refinery strike. Stick around. Right back after this.
Simple as rock and roll would save us all. Now who'd have thought that after all, it was rock and roll?
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
The GOP-led House of Representatives has proudly achieved a historic legislative record. A record in futility, that is. Also in absurdiosity. In February, for the 56th time, they focused the entire array of brain cells in their 245-member majority on an effort that would directly harm millions of Americans, namely the repeal of Obamacare. Yes, the Nincompoop Caucus has now wasted Congress's time and credibility by voting not once, not 10 or 20 times, but 56 times to take away even the minimal level of health coverage for previously uninsured people. But wait, it's possible that I misstated that number. It seems that House Speaker John Boehner's team has been so overcome by its passion for eliminating health care that they lost track of how deeply they've disappeared into the woods of right-wing fantasy land. A recount reveals that instead of taking 56 wild potshots at the program, they've actually held 67 votes on it. Meanwhile, the Obamacare program that the Boehner bunch is working so feverishly to kill, even though it's modeled directly on programs previously introduced by such Republican stalwarts as Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich, turns out to be working better than anyone, even its proponents, thought it would. And to the tooth-grinding dismay of the Kill Obamacare crowd, Americans like it. Naysaying Congress critters had scoffed from the start that no one would buy into the program. But on the deadline day for this year's sign-up, which came only 2 weeks after the House's 67th vote for repeal, a record number of people joined. That means 11.5 million Americans who had no coverage before Obamacare now do. This is Jim Hightower saying, did I mention that the lawmakers who are trying so furiously to eliminate coverage for those people enjoy government-paid coverage for themselves?
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
So yesterday morning, early yesterday morning in Whiting, Indiana, it looks like there was another a flare-up. They're not calling it an explosion. Evidently, an incident happened at the BP refinery there in Whiting. The 126-year-old refinery, where more than, 1,100 workers are on strike, fighting for better conditions. This isn't economic. This is about safety. This is about what happens when things go boom, or better yet, how we stop making things from going boom. Here to talk to us a little bit about this, day 24 of this nationwide strike with the United Steelworkers and the refining industry. I got Steve Gary. He's the president of Steelworkers Local 12591 out in Mount Vernon, Washington. Steve, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I look at another one of these incidents, another one of these moments where something went boom, something went flash, that got some attention. Is this bringing maybe the people to the table a little bit sooner, maybe kind of pushing for an agreement sooner?
Well, we'll see. We don't believe that inexperienced and poorly trained staff and office workers and the like can run these places safely at all for very long. It's only a matter of time before something happens that requires quick thinking and immediate attention. And unfortunately, these places that are where the corporations are trying to run them themselves are at higher risk right now, as well as the communities around those places. So I don't know much about the incident in Whiting other than a compressor failed, and it could have failed for a number of different reasons. But obviously, it just brings home that point that the way to keep these places safe is to have a skilled and experienced workforce in them that is not exhausted and is able to respond quickly in order to control that process.
Now, this is what I understand. It can help me if I'm mistaken here, but this isn't about money. This isn't really about anything other than safety. The idea that you shouldn't have people working 20, 30 days in a row, 12-hour days, that you should have proper staffing levels, proper training. That's what this 24-day strike thus far is about, as I understand. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct. Our safety concerns in the oil refining industry for a number of contract cycles now have focused on safety, primarily what we call process safety. Those are the things that need to be done in order to make sure these harmful chemicals and explosive products are properly contained and controlled. Fatigue is one of the elements under the law that has to be accounted for in order to maintain process safety. And we're simply tired of our members being exhausted and not being at their best on the job due to excessive forced overtime. We're also tired of our maintenance employees, their numbers being shrunk due to attrition. The companies waiting for them to retire and then replacing them with contractors who oftentimes are not as skilled or as experienced and not as well trained, and can also be, sometimes those contract maintenance workers can be forced or coerced to cut corners and take chances like our own people do not. So it's really about being the best you can be and being ready to go when that quick reaction has to happen and keeping these places safe.
That's an extremely important point you made there. Having that ability to have the voice to say, that's not how things should be done. Whereas a contractor, has that bottom line where, hey, whatever you want, just for me to keep this gig, I'll do what you want. Even though it may not be the absolute right or best way to have something done. And I would argue that, what you guys are doing is not only fighting for your own safety, but for the safety of the company, because if something goes boom, you're really saving the company from huge liabilities as well, right?
Oh, yeah, that's correct. We know that safe operations are much cheaper in the long run than tragedy. We've seen far too much tragedy in this industry. Unfortunately, it seems to be that the corporations are often run by people who feel that they want to get rich quick and then get out. They want it to happen on somebody else's watch instead of their own. And so they cut corners. They take chances. They don't fund inspection and maintenance and the kind of things that they need to do to stay safe. They don't do enough of that. And of course, our people need to work in these plants for 20, 30, 40 years. So we have a long-term view. And that's at the core of our differences sometimes.
So now I understand you, as part of the negotiating committee, kind of going around to some of the areas where you've got picket lines set up, and you had a rally today in Findlay, Ohio, at the big marathon headquarters there in Findlay. What kind of reaction did you get from members?
We had an awesome rally today in Findlay. We had a couple hundred people from around Ohio and other places. We had a lot of folks come up from Catlettsburg, Kentucky, from a marathon refinery down there. It's on strike. We're headed to Catlettsburg now for some meetings with those folks down there. We've been traveling on the road now to locations that are on strike or may eventually be on strike if we can't get some traction at the bargaining table with Shell. And they've been very, very inspiring. I think they're helpful for members, and they're helpful for us, quite frankly, as well, to know how members are thinking, what their concerns are and how we can best serve them. So it's been very, very productive.
Because here you are in 24 days. I got to be honest, I didn't. When a friend of mine asked how long I thought it would go, and I thought maybe a week, 2 at tops. 24 was not on my mind. Now I fear it could go longer. So it's good to hear that your members are holding strong.
Yeah, we've got great solidarity and unity on our line so far, and it's great to see, not just because that's what it takes to prevail in this fight, but also because so many of our members are younger and have never experienced anything like this. I've had a couple of my members at home tell me that they didn't know their grandparents or a parent or an uncle was on strike until this happened, and suddenly the stories start coming out, and those older people start telling our younger members, what it is and why it's important and how to stand strong and what they're going to gain in the future if they can stand strong. And that's really encouraging to see. It teaching a whole new generation of people how to stand up and fight back.
And not just your members, but I'm hoping for a whole new generation of people to lift their heads up and pay attention, that by collectively coming together, by standing shoulder to shoulder, you can make your conditions better, but also your standard of living better as well.
Oh, there you go. Get past the end of your own nose and start understanding how important it is to be with your family, with your community, and everyone else around you, and realize the benefit that comes from that. It's really the only way that I know how to have an effective voice against those who control so much and would like to have it all if we let them.
Yeah, because when I look at this, there's part of me, just the cynical part of me that would think the industry wouldn't think that you guys would have the unity to do this. And like many industries in this country, they're able to impose their will. And without the union, without being the steel workers, they would have, right?
Yeah, I think so. We're going to get them past this. We're going to get them past this point where they think they may be able to cause us to fold or give up or cross our lines. We'll get them past that point. And once we show enough unity to get to that point, then we'll start really getting some traction at the bargaining table, and we'll reach some language that works for us, and we'll settle this thing. But we got to get the industry to that point where they know that we're not going away.
And hopefully it doesn't take another tragedy or another incident, if you will. Last line of questioning, this has gone on 24 days now. Have you had any rumblings from maybe the Obama administration being involved, as we've seen out on the West Coast with the longshoremen and the lockout out there? Are you seeing any push to try and get maybe to mediation, things like that?
We understand that our international union officers, Leo Gerard, Tom Conway, have been in contact with the administration from day one. And so those discussions have been held. I can't put words in their mouth. I think we believe here in the rank and file that we can settle this thing on our own, and we're not going to need any government intervention to do that. But again, we're also committed to growing this thing if we have to. If we can't get Shell to come to the table and have some productive talks, then this thing is going to get bigger. And at what point the government wants to do something, that's really not my call. But we think we ought to be able to settle it ourselves.
Yeah, I personally want the government involved in none of it. I think these are things best worked out between the employer and the workforce. Keep the government hands out of it, especially the right wing, because it turns out often when government is involved, it's always on the corporate side. Just my personal view. You said that this could grow. How many refineries are being on strike right now, and how many potentially could there be?
I believe there are 15 out right now. There are, I think, more than 60 that could eventually be available for strike, although some of them are currently still working under a contract. They haven't got to an expiration date yet. Not all the contracts expire on the same date. I'm not quite sure how many are currently under extension right now and available for strike, but it's more than 15, substantially more. And again, we didn't want this thing to begin with. We don't want to expand it, but we know what we have to do if we can't get the industry to pay attention to our concerns.
Yeah, no worker ever wants to go on strike, and in the times I've been on strike, it wasn't a joyous time. It was tough for family. It was tough for the workers. It was tough for everybody. But at the end of the day, sometimes you get pushed into a position where it's the last thing left. It's the last arrow in the quiver, in the hopes that you could jumpstart talks to get things productive and moving in the right direction. I'm sad to see this at this point, but I know you guys will hold on and things will get better tomorrow.
Yep, that's right. Thank you, brother.
Steve, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Steve Gary, president of the United Steelworkers, Local 12591 out there in Mount Vernon, Washington. And look, as I've said, no one wants to go on strike. Nobody wants to deal with this. But sometimes you don't have another choice. You don't have a plan B. And, maybe, and it's like a lot of this stuff, you see the darkest hours. You see what's going on in Wisconsin. You see what's going on here in Pennsylvania. Maybe out of the darkest hour, you see people growing stronger and doing things they never thought that they would do before. And I listened to Steve there talk about the younger guys who are now hearing the stories from their parents and their grandparents about how, these battles were fought, years and years ago, because every generation thinks we're going to fight this battle and it's going to finally be over. And my kids are never going to have to do this. Well, sadly, our kids are going to have to. And we've got to be the example. We've got to be the ones to show them the way. Simple stuff. But again, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. If you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, if you got any thoughts, questions, comments, anything on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
End up like a dog that's been beat too much till you spend half your life just to cover it up now. Born in the USA, I was born in the USA, I was born.
The Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Is labor in solidarity around fighting right to work? The answer is a resounding yes.
Wisconsin AFL-CIO President Phil Neuenfeld. Wisconsin workers are mobilizing against the anti-union right-to-work bill being fast-tracked through the state legislature this week by Republicans. Rallies are set for Tuesday and Wednesday as the state Senate takes up the bill in an extraordinary session of the state legislature, a move designed to limit debate and speed passage of the anti-union bill. Neuenfeld says this bill will hurt all workers, not just union members.
Right to work is an attack on all Wisconsin families. Right to work cripples the fundamental rights of all workers to join together, stick together, and have each other's back in the workplace. When solidarity is eroded, it's the entire middle class who suffers. Collective bargaining and unions help set the standards in terms of wages and working conditions for all workers in a community. And unions provide essential training and knowledge with apprenticeship for workers.
UFCW 1473's John Iden appealed to Republican senators to vote their conscience on this bill.
Make no mistake, this bill is going to affect not only union members, but non-union members. Everyone's wages are going to be reduced as a result of this. And I encourage the Republican senators to have courage to vote against this and not rubber stamp it.
By attacking union automatic dues paycheck deductions, backers of the bill are trying to defund and thus weaken unions. Betsy Kippers is president of the Wisconsin Education Association Council, which lost collective bargaining rights in the 2011 Act 10 legislation.
This will not bring in new workers and more people to work. We already are seeing in educators, people are leaving the state because they're not respected and their value is not being reflected in being able to have a voice in what's important to give us a strong education system. And this will take away the voice of what's important to make sure we have good paying jobs, good safety regulations, and good training for all of the high quality workers in Wisconsin.
A new National Employment Law Project report says paying home care workers $15 an hour would not only put $16.5 billion in their pockets, but would add tens of thousands of new jobs to the U.S. economy. Home care workers pushing for $15 in a union are organizing town halls across the country to help energize their campaign. The NELP report says that $6.6 billion in economic activity would be added to our economy if home care workers were paid $15 an hour. Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, health care, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Back to the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
When those Walmart guys hear the word unionize, they go completely insane. They'll find out who, and boy, if it's you, you're in for a world of pain. Yeah, I got friends with low wages. They work for Walmart in outrageously bad conditions. Cause the union's missing.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So I'm sure you saw the news. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. Walmart's coming out saying, we're going to raise wages. Look how wonderful we are. Pat us on the back and congratulate us. I've actually had a couple people say, see how wonderful they are. See what a good company they are. And look, the only reason that they're talking about raising wages is because they've got thousands of workers across the country going, hey, we want raises, and willing to go into the streets and cause a ruckus. That's the way. No such thing as the benevolency of the dictator. It doesn't happen. It comes from people fighting for it. But I saw this report the other day by the EPI, the Economic Policy Institute, and one of the key findings in it is raising wages is the key to addressing middle-class income stagnation, rising income inequality, and lagging economic mobility, and is essential to moving families out of poverty. And I said, wow, gee, I wish I would have thought of that. Brilliance. And which is why we've asked one of the people who involved in it, Elise Gould. She's one of the senior economist over at the Economic Policy Institute. Elise, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me. I am a senior economist. I wouldn't want to claim the senior economist, but yes, I am the author of the study.
All right, you are the senior economist on this program. Look, I mean, you can look at that sentence and go, yeah, that makes sense. How do we get to that point to where we raise this 35, 40-year war on inflation and the war on workers and the war on raises?
Well, everything you said is absolutely true. Right now, and for most of the past generation, employers have held most of the cards. And if we want to restore wage growth, if we want to restore living standards for typical Americans in this country, we need to deal workers a stronger hand vis-a-vis their employers. In the near term, this means allowing the recovery to get back to genuine full employment. Nothing really saps workers' ability to negotiate effectively for higher wages like a bunch of willing replacements lined outside their boss's door and the inability to leave to get a better job, right? There's so many workers out there looking for work, and there are between 5 and 6 million missing workers who have left the labor force because of weak job opportunities. All of those things are the reasons why we haven't seen any of the job growth that we've seen over the last few years really translate into decent wage growth.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as bad as it was, maybe 100 years ago, where you literally looked out the window at the Rouge plant there in Michigan and saw 1,000 people waiting to take your job at that moment, but they're out there. I get it.
Right. And again, I might say that that's kind of a low bar. We've seen economic growth that has been fantastic over the last 35 years, GDP growth, productivity growth, and yet we're not really seeing it translate into wages. So we need to enact policies that pretty much take the thumb off the employer side of the scale.
Absolutely. And I think Elizabeth Warren hit on this last week when she pointed out that back in the 70s, the amount of wealth that went to the shareholders was significantly less back in the 70s than it is now. And she pointed out something like 91% of the profit that these big corporations take in goes to the shareholders, and only what's that 9% left to go back to reinvesting in their business and maybe paying their employees.
Right. Absolutely. When you look at data like the CEO to average worker pay, that 30 years ago was more like 20 to 1, and now it's 200, 300 to 1. So people at the top of the corporations are getting so much of the gains, of the productivity gains of the typical worker. They're seeing it. Typical workers aren't getting those wage increases.
So what do you say to the person who's, oh, you're just envy, you're jealous, you're not one of them, and this is class war?
I'm not sure what to say to them, but I think that there are particular policies that we could pay attention to and actually strengthen the ability of typical workers to bargain for better wages. This includes raising the minimum wage, strengthening workers' ability to form unions, reducing wage theft, updating overtime provisions, ending misclassification of employees as independent contractors. It also means we should do things like regularize undocumented workers, which would lift their wages and wages of those in the same fields of work. And also things like ensuring workers can earn paid sick leave and paid family leave, which provide a greater measure of economic security and allow for a better balance between work and family. All of these things should be on the table when we think about policies to help typical American workers and their families.
Well, see, now that's why we lose that's why we lose. That's so complicated. There's a lot of ideas there to go through. It's so much easier to believe that there's a magical hand that mysteriously gives us raises with fairy dust. That's much easier to believe in the magic hand than all of those things you just laid out.
Well, that may be the case, but it's not really how it works. We've been tipping the scales in favor of those with more power, and that has left workers without much to speak of, really. I think that the decline in unions has been the leading force in the failure of American workers' wages to rise, not just for union workers, but for non-union workers as well.
Yeah, I just read an article over at Bloomberg where it said, as the rich are getting richer, and is this a time for unions to thrive? And I go, yeah, which is why we're seeing in Wisconsin them ramming through right to work, their whole no rights at work agenda. Why we're seeing here in Pennsylvania them pursuing this paycheck destruction. Why we've seen this whole no rights at work cocktail all across this country just for this moment when people go, hey, we've been tightening the belt. We look like the women back in the the 1800s with the corsets already.
Right. I mean, I think that legislation is more damaging than many people realize. Right to work makes it just so much harder for ordinary workers to form unions, to be able to bargain together for their wages, to give themselves a little bit of economic power, to be able to stand up together and say, hey, this company's doing better. Let's get a little bit more of this economic pie.
Yeah, but the thing that gets me though is the message that we keep hearing, Elise, is that unions are only for those for the lazy people and for the stupid people. Educated people don't need it because they can negotiate and make their own deals. But you look at what's going on Silicon Valley. You look at what's going on Wall Street with these hedge fund operators. Really smart people are really getting screwed.
That's absolutely true. In the paper that you referenced that I wrote last week, if you look at the top of the wage distribution, those workers with the most education and the highest wages, over the last year, real wages for them actually fell at the 90th percentile, at the 95th percentile. Real wages fell for workers with a 4-year college degree, and even for those workers with an advanced degree. For those with an advanced degree, they saw a decline of 2.2% between 2013 and 2014. The economy is not really working for most people. This isn't just a story about the middle or the bottom. This is a story across the board. And in fact, the only glimmer of positive news that we really saw when we look at wages between last year and 2014 is actually at the very bottom. And at the very bottom, wages actually increased to the 10th percentile. And it's not really a mystery as to what happened there. The answer is simple. We have some labor standards that provide wage protections. Most specifically, 18 states in 2014, 18 states increased their minimum wage in 2014. That states where about 57% of the workforce resides. So it's not surprising that these labor standards can actually support wages and lift them up at the bottom.
And the thing that gets me is, when you talk about all of this wage stagnation and all of these things, these are really man-made problems. And you listed, and very aptly, you listed a lot of the problems that we have. The fact that we give people titles and not raises. The fact that, we've figured out how to usurp some of the minimum wage laws by making people management and not paying overtime, and all of these things that past generations of workers in this country relied on for better incomes and to move up on the socioeconomic ladder and have a better standard of living, that we've allowed employers to break and not and have a government that doesn't enforce it. This all seems to me to be a man-made crisis. There's no natural disaster here.
That is absolutely correct. We have enacted policies that have given employers more power vis-a-vis their workers, and therefore we can enact policies to reverse it. We just need the political will to do it.
And again, that comes to getting some of the bums like we have here in Pennsylvania pushing this paycheck deception stuff as a constitutional amendment. My head's about to explode. Do we have no other problems in this state and in this country than to push a constitutional amendment to steal rights from workers? It makes me scratch my head and go, how bad does it have to get before we lift our heads and go, you know what? It's time to go to the streets.
Well, I hope it doesn't have to get too bad.
Yeah, but so you look at this, and I've talked about it on this program a number of times. When I started working back in the late 80s, I was throwing boxes on a shipping dock while I was going to college. I was making $15 an hour with healthcare credits and pension credits. I look at now the exact same job. The exact same job pays about $11.82 an hour to start. And you go, this isn't adjusted for inflation. This isn't some economic gimmickry. This isn't Elise Gould doing her economic wizardry or anything like that. This is actually dollar for dollar. $15 back in a quarter a century ago, $11.82 today. There's a serious problem there.
Yes, absolutely. Wage stagnation is a serious problem. It's very hard for people to make ends meet. It's hard to imagine how so many people are surviving on the low wages that are being paid to them.
Is it because we're subsidizing the low wage economy with, with food stamps and with school lunch programs and LIHEAP and housing assistance and all of the things that the Republicans love to point and go, those people are lazy who are getting the 47% who pay no federal income tax. They're the reason things are so bad.
No, I mean, I think that there are plenty of people that are employable that want to work. That's why the unemployment rate is still high. That's why there are millions of missing workers out there. There are people ready and eager to work. I mean, we have people in this country who do work full-time, full year, and still can't lift their families out of poverty. That's criminal.
It is criminal. And for me, I would love to go back to a time where we put wage increases and productivity back together, where the meritocracy that the right wing loves to cite were actually the case.
Yes, me too. Although, we have seen some positive economic forces in the last 35 years. We have seen women coming back into the workforce, or coming into the workforce. So we have seen some improvements in some policies there. But by and large, we have seen workers lose their bargaining power left and right, and we need to return to a time. It would be great.
Yeah.
Let's get those back.
There you go. And to me, it's a pretty simple answer. We need legislation, and we need the ability for workers to be able to collectively bargain and have the right to join unions. Because as you said at the beginning, and I disagree a little bit, you said, employers hold many of the cards, is what you said. The reality is they hold all of them. The National Labor Relations Act gave us one or two of the rights back. And I think we'd be fighting for those rights again.
Yes, absolutely.
Simple stuff. Elise Gould, I appreciate you taking time for us and enduring my ranting.
No, I'm right there with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much. Senior economist over at the Economic Policy Institute. If you want to take a look at their study, epi.org, the website, we've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We're on the road to nowhere. We're on the road to nowhere. We're on the road to nowhere.
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1919. The U.S. Congress passed the child labor tax law. At the turn of the 20th century, child labor had increasingly become an issue of concern in the United States. In 1890, the census found more than 1 million children between the ages of 10 and 15 in the workforce. By 1910, that number had exceeded 2 million working children. Many of these children worked long hours in unhealthy conditions for low wages. Progressive activists led campaigns to bring national attention to the plight of these working children. As a result, many individual states passed limits on children's work. Nationally, there was no uniform legislation. Southern lawmakers were unwilling to push for child protections because local factory owners insisted child labor was necessary if Southern businesses were going to compete with manufacturers in the North. The state laws that did exist were poorly enforced, especially in Southern states. In 1909, a survey of South Carolina mills found that nearly 92% of them were violating what little child labor regulations were in place. In 1916, the U.S. Congress attempted to regulate child labor, but a federal judge ruled that legislation unconstitutional. Undeterred, Congress tried again in 1919. They passed a law that said companies in certain industries would face a 10% tax on their profits for hiring child labor. The act defined child labor as any worker under the age of 16 in any mine or quarry and under the age of 14 in any mill, cannery, workshop, factory, or manufacturing establishment. Within a few years, the Supreme Court found that law unconstitutional. In an 8-1 decision, the court ruled that Congress could not use taxes to enforce regulatory power. Although it was only in effect briefly, the child labor tax law did cause a downturn in the use of child labor. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been talking about the 21st century proliferation of terrorism and learning more about the tactic. One important thing we've learned is that terrorist acts rarely lead to their ultimate goal. Occasionally there are some successes, but over the long haul, it has proven to be ineffective. So why are there still attempts? Well, it's normally used by those who have no other strengths. They can't conquer with education, big numbers, better technology, or any other method. That is certainly true with those who act alone, those we today call lone wolves. American terrorists Timothy McVeigh and Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, could only get themselves heard by causing dramatic and deadly acts, and it has been going on for centuries. There just hasn't been color TV and an internet available to let us know about it. Join us again for America's most deadly and long-lasting terrorist group prior to 9/11. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make
Standing up to conservatives and corporatists every weeknight. The Rick Smith Show.
So now you see the light. Hey, stand up for your right. Come on, get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight.
And that's what it's going to take. And while I may have been a little rough there on Elise, and she's a good sport for. I'm of the mindset right now we need to have a militant labor movement. We need to have, and not this isn't. I've never been a top-down union person. I've never said the edict come from above. This comes from the grassroots. This comes from I think of my grandfather and their generation. It was theirs. They owned it. They took control of it. They had ownership of what was theirs. They fought for it. And and talking with this with Steve Gary, the steelworker, look, training another generation of the fight. Are we going to have to go through this? And just the other day at lunch, I was talking to a friend of mine about a book I'd read years and years ago. And I shouldn't say I read it; I skimmed it. Doing this kind of work, you a lot of books come across your desk that you go, I need to get the gist of it. But that was one that I interviewed the guy and I got the gist of it, and I wanted to go back and read it. But the basic premises of it was called The Fourth Turning. And I've had a lot of people say, oh, you should read that because it's. But in skimming it and going through, because I read a bit here, bit there. As I got it, this guy explained, look. There are really four basic generations, and this turning, this constant change of generation goes back. I think he took it back like to the 1500s or something, to where you had the greatest generation, the people who fought for things, the people who built things. They were the ones who built the prosperity, and their kids, they benefited from it. So you have this alpha generation, if you will, and I forget the names that he used, but you have this one generation that built things. You had the next generation, their children that benefited from their investments. So you can think about it this way: you had the World War II generation, the greatest generation, is what we call them. Then you had the baby boomers, and they, basically, lived off of the coattails of what their parents' generation had left, and they built on it. But really kind of lived off of that. Their kids, which I guess would be my generation, we're seeing the decline. We're living the decline. So the greatest generation built it up. The baby boomers, took it to the next level and really took advantage of the prosperity and all this. And then there's the decline. My generation is witnessing that decline. Now my children's generation, they're the ones who are going to have to fight again. They're the next the next turn. And every 4 generations, you go through this, that you have this, they're the suffer generation, and then their kids will then be the greatest generation. And this whole thing will continue. And this guy went through, quite a bit of time. I think they're back to the 1500s, showing how these, because like they say, every 100 years, every 100 years, you have to fight the same battles. It's the same idea. And, we just haven't figured that out. And as Steve pointed out, we're training this generation of, hey, they didn't realize that their grandparents fought for better wages, better hours, better conditions, not just for themselves, but for the entire industry and for workers across the country. And, we need to have those education moments again. We need to have that time we go, this stuff isn't just given. You fight for it. And it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how important you think you are. You're expendable. And as we've seen with with the Googles and the Intels and all of these big corporations who figured out how to keep wages down, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter your income level. And I've often said, you go back into the 60s, there were management unions. Every worker should have a voice. And this is what just blows my mind with people. I have people who think, well, we're going to go in and argue with the boss. You lose. Individually, you lose. Because the boss controls all the cards. They can fire you at any time, in this state anyway, for any reason. Unless they decide to call you something, you old whatever, and break some federal law. Age discrimination, race, one of the religion, one of those things. If you discriminate on those grounds, then you got trouble. But if you just say, you know what, I don't like the color of your shoes, you're fired. There's no shoe discrimination law. You're fired. And your recourse, well, your recourse is to file for unemployment. And if the employer wants, he can fight it. And then you can go get a lawyer and put down, $10,000 or $20,000 to try and fight a losing case. But at the end of the day, if you had a union, and this is kind of where I go back to this, if you've got that contract in place that says this is the procedure for firing someone, and there's this huge misconception out there that we can't fire union workers. Sure, you can. It's called due process. Something that as a nation we constitutionally kind of get. That you don't take people's life and liberty away. You don't take their property away without due process of law. The same should be on the job. The same should be where you earn your living. Because if you lose your job, aren't they literally taking away your ability to have life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, or pursuit of property? I mean, just kind of a thought if you think about it. And yet here we keep coming back to this moment where the very well-to-do in this country want more. And they're doing everything they can do within the rule of law. Look, they're doing it, and it's not a conspiracy. I've had someone say, well, you're talking conspiracy theory there, Rick. No. They're very open and honest about it. Very open and honest. They're not going to lie to you. And, I've been saying this for about a decade now. I predicted this stuff about a decade ago. Not because I'm Magellan, not because I'm bright, not because I'm smarter than anybody, but because I read their stuff. When the right wing puts something out, I read it. They're very open, very honest. There's no shenanigans here. They're going to tell you right to your face. I mean, the fact that Scott Walker, anybody believed Scott Walker that he wasn't going to go after after right to work should have their heads examined. Because if you remember the video, and if you've ever seen the video of him talking to Diane Hendricks, the billionaire woman, when she said, "Oh, when are we going to pass right to work?" And she's all tingly in the panties over this. He said, "Well, the first step is divide and conquer. We're going to go after the public sector unions." He was very honest. First thing, divide, conquer. Going after the public sector. Once we get them under control, then we got the rest of them. Once we weaken their stronghold, once we destroy that, then the rest of them just a fish in a barrel. And where do you think we are now? Just 4 years. Now bring that back to Pennsylvania. We got a governor now who's that shenanigans has stopped for the time being. Doesn't mean it's over. Doesn't mean it goes away. There's a piece of right to work legislation right now banging around in the General Assembly. It's always there. The moneyed interests want it. And if the moneyed interests want it, do you think they want it to help you? Do you think they want something to help their worker? Do you really believe that? I sure hope not, because we got a lot more work to do than I thought if that's the case. But in looking at this, what the wealth class wants, they pay for and they get. And it's going to take us, an active, engaged, militant working class, to fight back. Because while they do have all the money, we've still outprocreated them. We still have the votes. And come next election, we got to get to the polls. It is that simple. Doesn't get any simpler than that. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to find out what's going on in Wisconsin. Right back after this. Stick around.
They don't faze me, even if I look and act really crazy. I don't wait till she betrayed me. Now my vision is no longer hazy. I'm very lucky to have my crew. Bitch to find me when she flew. I've been knocked down, beat down, black and blue. She's not the one coming back for you. She's not the one coming back for you. If I fall back down, you're royal and over again. If I fall back down, you're gonna be my friend.
Some say the blast sounded like a bomb and felt like an earthquake.
Another day, another oil explosion, this time at Exxon refinery in California.
The intelligence assessment describes some anti-pipeline and anti-oil sands activists as violent extremists.
Anti-petroleum activists are a security threat, says Canada. January 2015, the second hottest January on record. Plus,
The best idea we ever had. Our belief that the country's most special places should belong not just to the rich, not just to the powerful, but belong to everybody.
President Obama designates 3 new national monuments.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Just one more day of oil in trouble.
Yep. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, earlier this week we reported there were 2 oil train derailments in North America. We need to issue a correction. In fact, there have been 3 in the past week.
Yes.
And just as I predicted, by the way, as the fire is still smoldering in West Virginia from that huge oil train explosion out there, Keystone XL pipeline proponents are once again claiming that this is why we need to build the pipeline. Here's Fox News, of course.
Proponents of Keystone XL say their pipeline would get oil to market cheaper and far safer than the trains.
Now, in fact, oil transport by train has exploded in this country, pardon the pun. Back in 2008, there was only about 10,000 train cars. Now, as of 2014, about 500,000 of these oil train cars are crisscrossing the country. So, wouldn't it be safer to build the pipeline?
No, you're right. Oil train traffic has increased 4,000%. But as far as total amount of oil spilled, pipelines still spill about 3 times more.
So even though shipment by oil bomb train has boomed over the past 6 years, as far as the environment goes, pipelines are still far more dangerous.
Overall, yeah.
Someone needs to tell Fox News. I'm sure they're waiting to hear it. And speaking of oil explosions, what do you have for us today, Desi?
Well, for the second time in a week, the oil industry was involved in a major explosion and fire near people's homes. A huge explosion on Wednesday destroyed sections of a 100-year-old Exxon refinery in Torrance, California.
How old?
107 years.
And it's still in operation.
Yes.
Giant flames visible for miles. The ground shaking felt for miles as well. An explosion rocked this Torrance refinery, ripping apart structures and crushing cars.
Only minor injuries were reported. 13 schools near the refinery were ordered to shelter in place for several hours because what else are they going to do? Air quality was affected, but officials said it stayed within acceptable limits. The explosion measured the equivalent to a 1.7 earthquake on the Richter scale. The cause of the blast is still under investigation.
Here's the cause. Oil blows up. Just saying.
In Canada, a leaked intelligence memo from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police calls Indigenous tribes and environmentalists who oppose oil and gas development a growing threat to Canada's national security.
The intelligence assessment describes some anti-pipeline and anti-oil sands activists as violent extremists.
The January 2014 report lumps all groups against the oil industry together, describing them as a highly organized and well-financed anti-Canadian petroleum movement.
See, I knew you were a terrorist.
They called them anti-Canadian. Canada's Conservative Harper administration is currently pushing to expand broad anti-terror legislation to include anybody who interferes with, quote, critical infrastructure or the economic and financial stability of Canada, and even allows preventive detention of people who might do something.
It's long been said, when the U.S. sneezes, Canada catches a cold. It sounds like Canada has caught the flu. I'm sorry, Canada.
And disturbingly, that secret memo also questions the science on global warming.
Naturally.
Here in the U.S., the FBI is ramping up monitoring of anti-Keystone XL pipeline activists at their homes and workplaces.
Oh, hello, FBI.
Meanwhile, the planet is still warming. After 2014 clocked in as the hottest year on record, the month of January in 2015 was the second hottest January on record, according to NASA and NOAA.
Those liars.
President Obama this week used his executive authority to protect 3 new national monuments from development for all Americans: Browns Canyon National Monument in Colorado, Hanaolioli Internment Camp in Hawaii, and the Pullman Historic District of Chicago, prompting one congressional Republican to call him King Obama.
Of course he did. As Obama himself noted,
conservation is a truly American idea.
Yeah, back when we had Republicans like Teddy Roosevelt and, even Richard Nixon.
Yeah, back when conservatives actually believed in conservation.
For much more on those stories and all of them that we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, and iTunes, where we hope you will give us a good review, and that helps other people find our reports easier. Find us and follow us on the Facebook and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Is this land made for you and me? This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island. From the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream.
What do you believe would be the repercussions for Democrats if they end up losing in the recall election?
I think honestly, there aren't going to be any repercussions.
We ain't voting no more prima donnas. You want to call the National Guard? Let's get it poppin'. What happens in Wisconsin don't stay in Wisconsin. Mr. President, 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 you're wrong. This is a national issue.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. This is a national issue. And I remember Debbie Wasserman Schultz saying, "Oh no, it's not gonna affect anything." How wrong could you be? Honestly and truthfully, how wrong can you be? And this is, at the time, I remember saying, not just to Democrats, but to the labor friends of mine, that this right now, what's going on in Wisconsin, while I thought the recall effort was a bad idea, to recall Walker, especially when you're going to run the same bad Democrat, because there wasn't really an upside because you weren't going to win. I said, this is now going to have national implications, because what it said at the time is that this agenda, this no rights at work agenda, is something that's going to have legs. It's something that's going to find its way here and find its way across the country. And that's scary stuff. But for me, again, this comes back to another moment where I go, again, the president, where was he during Wisconsin? Where was he as a leader? He was always out there saying, hey, I believe in unions. Where was he in the fight? Now, I do see at some point, this is going to be the issue in 2016 as well. You're going to have Republicans running on, hey, we need to have it nationwide. See, Michigan did it. Wisconsin did it. Indiana did it. We need to have it everywhere. And then the question becomes, and this is another one of those moments. You've got Rick Scott here in Pennsylvania saying, hey, let's steal jobs from Pennsylvania, bring them down to Florida because we steal our children's future and hand it over to you because you're not going to pay any taxes. And we have a much lower wage structure. So the same jobs that we have here that pay, probably a decent wage will go down south and they'll be lower paying jobs. So as a nation, we have a lowering of the standard of living. It doesn't take a genius to figure this out. Where I live in Carlisle, where they had the Carlisle Tire and Wheel, place that was there for 93 years. Family sustaining jobs, supported a good portion of the community and a number of small businesses out of the consumers that came out of that workforce. When they moved, the wages that they were paying in Tennessee were, from what I was told, somewhere about 15% lower. And the benefits were much worse. Just all of the things got worse. As a nation, collectively, we actually were worse off. And yet the state of Tennessee gave them, I think it was like $30-40 million, a huge sum of money to steal those jobs away, to make conditions in the nation worse. I mean, stop and really process that for a moment. Now, the idea and the argument behind this no rights at work agenda, this so-called right to work, is that, and you heard it in Indiana loud, you heard it in places like Oklahoma when they passed it, we'll be able to steal jobs from our neighbors. All of those manufacturing jobs that they have there, those good paying jobs, we'll be able to steal them and make them, okay paying jobs. That's the argument. We'll be able to steal from them. And I've always said, what happens when everybody is in that boat? What happens when eventually all of us are no rights at work states? And all of us are racing to the bottom. What's the next step? Are we going to then, instead of saying, well, we won't have any rights and we'll work for a couple of dollars less. And then when all of us have no rights and we're all working for a couple of dollars less, then where does it go? A couple of dollars less, a couple of dollars more or less? Does it come down to we'll work for food? Here, take my children, take my wife. Is this where we end up? And you may chuckle, but we've been here before. And you go back to that idea of the fourth turning. These four generations that keep recycling, and these same ideas that keep coming back, and the same bad conditions that keep coming back and back and back, and the same fights and the same rhetoric, and we never seem to learn. Someone asked me if right to work was the end of it, and I said no. They want to take us back to the days of Lochner. They want to take us back to where there are no labor laws. All of that stuff's unconstitutional. They want to take us back to where if you're desperate enough, and trust me, you will be, to work for virtually no money in horrible conditions with no security whatsoever and no health care or pensions or any of those things, then you'll get hired. And you'll be used up, abused, and thrown away like trash. And I often tell the story of, when I was volunteering as a Big Brother, I took the kid down to the coal mines, up to the coal mines and then down into the coal mines up in the Scranton area. And we went down, 300 feet down into the mines. And the guy who gave the tour did an amazing job, because what they had done is they set up the mine to look like it was a working mine. And they used these dummies, to show what people did. And they had this guy crammed into this crevice, trying to set dynamite. I'm going, there's no way you'd catch me in there. But as we're down there, the kid walked, this kid who I think was like 8 or 9 at the time, he walked up to one of the little dolls that they had, and he was the same size as, and, he's eye to eye with this doll, and realized at that moment that, 100 years ago, he was that doll. He was that kid opening and closing the door. That evidently is a fire break. His job was to make sure that the door closes, because it'll open. When the coal carts come down the ramp, it'll open. and it'll open violently if you don't open it for it. His job was to close it, to make sure that if a fire went through, he closed the door. If there were, an alert for gas or whatever, his job was to close the door. And that kid had a 50% fatality rate. Think about that for a minute. 8 years old, 6 to 8 year olds, 50% fatality rate. Because, they would work 8, 10, 12, 14 hours. And, kids get tired. They had their lunch. They're sitting down. They're tired. Their little eyes kind of droop off. And then down comes one of those carts and slams the door open and smashes them against the wall. And there, their broken body, bloody, beaten, bones shattered, and blood all over, lifeless. The supervisor comes over, grabs it, throws it up on top of the coal cart, takes them up to the surface. No fanfare, no parades, no celebrations, no, oh, we love him, no mourning, none of that. Then they throw the body up on top of the little clippity-clop horse, and they clip, clop over to the house, where the supervisor takes the body and throws it at the door. No niceties. No, we'll take it to the morgue for you. No. Throws the body at the door. The bones knocking against the door basically is the warning to say, okay, time for you to get out, because you can't pay the rent to the company store. Or, if the foreman likes you, maybe you can curry favor. Maybe the young lasses in the house can curry favor. And if you think I'm kidding you, go back and read our history. And for those who say, oh, no, couldn't happen again. Yes, it could. And as we push and then we allow the right wing in this country, and some of the Democrats, these idiot Democrats too, to say we need to destroy the social safety net and we need people to be on their own because we need desperation. Because that's how you control a working class. Desperation. The Scott Wagners of the world, the Scott Walkers of the world, the Koch brothers of the world, they thrive on desperation. Because you're willing to do things and to work in conditions that if you had options and you had choices, you wouldn't. And to me, that's kind of frustrating. Randall sent me an email during the break. He said, conservatives are technically correct. There are jobs out there. Problem is you actually lose money if you took them. It's true. And the reason that we're not taking those jobs that Randall says are out there, that you would lose money at, is because you're not desperate enough, which is why you see the attacks against unemployment benefits, why you see the attacks against food stamps, why you see the attacks against the social safety net for working people. We don't mind a social safety net for the billionaire class. We don't mind bailing out their losses on their gambling losses on Wall Street. We don't mind bailing them out when they destroy our economy and crash our banks. Now, they don't mind that at all. But heaven forbid somebody get a food stamp or buy a candy bar. Yeah, I remember when I was a kid taking the clown money to the local corner store with the list from my mother of things that we needed. Now remember, our cupboards were bare, completely bare. We'd get the clown money and that's how we ate. And my mother would say, go get this stuff and bring it back. And if there's anything left over, you can spend a dime and get these Nutter Butter bars that I to this day am still hooked on. But it was an absolute treat. Didn't get them often, but boy, when she said I could, and to this day, I mean, I wasn't much older than my son, who's 8 years old now. I wasn't much older than that. I still remember the woman behind the counter berating me. How dare you want something? Look at this. Can he get this? And making just this huge scene. And it doesn't change, man. It doesn't change. Because as Scott Walker said, they're going to use divide and conquer. And if they can keep the working class of this country divided and sliced and diced and pitted against one another because one person's getting something the other one isn't getting, and it's not even really getting something, divide and conquer works. Because while we're focused on the little 8-year-old kid getting the Nutter Butter bar, or maybe that person over there who's who's getting something that I didn't get chips. You're focused on each other and not on the people who are robbing us blind. And in the wealthiest country in the world, and we should be in fear. We should be furious with this. We should be absolutely furious. Let's take a quick break. Right back.
Bar's still open, but man, it's slow. The tip jar's light and the register's low. The bartender don't have much to say. The regular crowd gets thinner each day. Some are maxed out all their credit cards. Some are working 2 jobs and living in cars. Minimum wage won't pay for a roof, won't pay for a drink. If you gotta have proof, just try it yourself, Mr. CEO. See how far $5.15 an hour will go. Take a part-time job at one of your stores. I bet you can't make it here anymore.
From Lisbon, Portugal, this is your World in 2 for Tuesday, February 24th, 2015. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service.
Jack Straw from Wichita got his money down.
That Jack Straw, the fictional character of Grateful Dead lore, was a man on the run, an escaped convict that eventually turned on and killed a fellow escapee. But there's also a real Jack Straw, a British MP, and he's now caught up in a legal scandal of his own. Straw of the minority Labour Party, as well as Malcolm Rifkind of the ruling Conservative Party, have both been implicated this week in a Cash for Access probe launched by the British broadcaster Channel 4 and the Daily Telegraph. A reporter posing as a businessman approached both men to inquire about obtaining political favors in exchange for cash, and both lawmakers quoted daily rates of over $7,500 for their help. Nick Maxwell is the research manager for Transparency International UK.
One of the issues we've found with a wide range of lobbying scandals or issues which bring into question parliamentary ethics is that a lot of the behaviour can actually take place within the rules.
Both Straw and Rifkin were suspended from Parliament yesterday, and Rifkin announced today that he'll step down voluntarily. But Straw, who's not seeking re-election in May, maintains he did no wrong, since he intended to help out the businessman after leaving Westminster. What's more, the Telegraph reported yesterday that upon leaving office, Straw will join the board of an office furniture company that he lobbied on behalf of while in office. According to new 2010 rules, ministers can't lobby directly for 2 years after leaving their posts, but that doesn't apply to the average MP.
The issue of the revolving door, when ministers or public officials move from their official roles outside into the private sector, is one of our key corruption risks. And what we see is that very, very common in the UK system.
It turns out Washington isn't the only place where money unlocks influence, and the law always seems to be a step behind. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
The GOP-led House of Representatives has proudly achieved a historic legislative record. A record in futility, that is. Also in absurdiosity. In February, for the 56th time, they focused the entire array of brain cells in their 245-member majority on an effort that would directly harm millions of Americans, namely the repeal of Obamacare. Yes, the nincompoop caucus has now wasted Congress's time and credibility by voting not once, not 10 or 20 times, but 56 times to take away even the minimal level of health coverage for previously uninsured people. But wait, it's possible that I misstated that number. It seems that House Speaker John Boehner's team has been so overcome by its passion for eliminating health care that they lost track of how deeply they've disappeared into the woods of right-wing fantasy land. A recount reveals that instead of taking 56 wild potshots at the program, they've actually held 67 votes on it. Meanwhile, the Obamacare program that the Boehner bunch is working so feverishly to kill, even though it's modeled directly on programs previously introduced by such Republican stalwarts as Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich, turns out to be working better than anyone, even its proponents, thought it would. And to the tooth-grinding dismay of the Kill Obamacare crowd, Americans like it. Naysaying Congress critters had scoffed from the start that no one would buy into the program. But on the deadline day for this year's sign-up, which came only 2 weeks after the House's 67th vote for repeal, a record number of people joined. That means 11.5 million Americans who had no coverage before Obamacare now do. This is Jim Hightower saying, did I mention that the lawmakers who are trying so furiously to eliminate coverage for those people enjoy government-paid coverage for themselves?
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Where family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. Stephen Dawes over at Democratic Underground points out about 2,000 construction workers, electricians, carpenters, and other union members rallied there in the Wisconsin Capitol today to push back against the fast tracking of the No Rights at Work bill there, the Right to Work bill backed by Republicans and the governor there. Steve writes, the gathering was larger than most at the Capitol, but paled in numbers and intensity to the protests seen 4 years ago when Walker pushed through his measure that effectively ended collective bargaining for most public workers. Rallies then lasted for weeks and grew as large as 100,000 people. And we were there. There were people everywhere. And, you look at this and, this rally today, and this is people, showing their frustration. And they should, because, you look at this piece of legislation, and this, as I've said, is part of a grand national strategy. So it's not really surprising, and it shouldn't surprise anyone, that the legislation that Walker is going to sign, that the Republicans are ramming through, is an ALEC piece of legislation. It is virtually identical to word for word, the ALEC model legislation. And when you look at, the guy who's the head of the Senate who says, well, this is going to create jobs, you got to ask the question, what planet does he live on? The Senate Majority Leader guy named Scott Fitzgerald. This is something that, once again, could jumpstart the economy, he says. But the reality is we've seen study after study that shows that this doesn't actually help. It actually makes things worse. And that, unfortunately, is where we're heading. And maybe that's what it takes. Maybe it takes things getting much worse before they get any better. And I come back to, and this is where I struggle. Now, I understand. I fully understand this is political Machiavellianism. This is gutting your enemy in public. This is taking them out and spilling their guts in public. This is goring them. This is humiliating and destroying them in public. I get that. But it doesn't do what we were told it does. And I don't know that they ever believed it was supposed to. But what I don't understand is I get the politicians doing this. I don't understand the voters. I don't understand average everyday Republicans going, oh, this is what we need. What you're in essence saying is that employees and employers cannot have a relationship. Because look, most employers that I know, they don't want the hassle of a divided workforce. They don't need that headache. And I look at this, there's going to be a lot of chaos around this. And I think that's what the right wing wants. Because while labor is focusing on this, they're not focusing on making people's lives better. They're not focusing on safer workplaces and better wages and health care and all of those things that have been the hallmark of the labor movement for the last 100 years. And that's the plan. It's busy work. And I've been saying that for years. I mean, the people who've listened to the program for the last several years know. I mean, this has been the plan. This has been it all along. And the sad thing, the frustrating thing to me is it's not even an original thought coming out of Scott Walker, who now, hey, maybe he's the leading guy for president. Because after all, as one person emailed me, he did win 3 elections in Wisconsin. So I got to wonder if this is what the people of the state of Wisconsin want. You got to ask that question. Sad stuff. Anyway, if you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com, with your thoughts, questions, comments, anything on your mind. Quick break, right back.
Me and my people are just about due. I'm a massive airstrike on a beautiful night. Yeah, it's my song I'm singing. Somebody better start counting. We're coming out swinging.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Is labor in solidarity around fighting right to work? The answer is a resounding yes.
Wisconsin AFL-CIO President Phil Neuenfeld. Wisconsin workers are mobilizing against the anti-union right-to-work bill being fast-tracked through the state legislature this week by Republicans. Rallies are set for Tuesday and Wednesday as the state Senate takes up the bill in an extraordinary session of the state legislature, a move designed to limit debate and speed passage of the anti-union bill. Neuenfeld says this bill will hurt all workers, not just union members.
Right to work is an attack on all Wisconsin families. Right to work cripples the fundamental rights of all workers to join together, stick together, and have each other's back in the workplace. When solidarity is eroded, it's the entire middle class who suffers. Collective bargaining and unions help set the standards in terms of wages and working conditions for all workers in a community. And unions provide essential training and knowledge with apprenticeship for workers.
UFCW 1473's John Iden appealed to Republican senators to vote their conscience on this bill.
Make no mistake, this bill is going to affect not only union members, but non-union members. Everyone's wages are going to be reduced as a result of this. And I encourage Republican senators to have courage to vote against this and not rubber stamp it.
By attacking union automatic dues paycheck deductions, backers of the bill are trying to defund and thus weaken unions. Betsy Kippers is president of the Wisconsin Education Association Council, which lost collective bargaining rights in the 2011 Act 10 legislation.
This will not bring in new workers and more people to work. We already are seeing in educators, people are leaving the state because they're not respected and their value is not being reflected in being able to have a voice in what's important to give us a strong education system. And this will take away the voice of what's important to make sure we have good paying jobs, good safety regulations, and good training for all of the high quality workers in Wisconsin.
A new National Employment Law Project report says paying home care workers $15 an hour would not only put $16.5 billion in their pockets, but would add tens of thousands of new jobs to the U.S. economy. Home care workers pushing for $15 in a union are organizing town halls across the country to help energize their campaign. The NELP report says that $6.6 billion in economic activity would be added to our economy if home care workers were paid $15 an hour.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, health care, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
And you know, the sandwich comes that you touch this, go pay the cashier, there's your sandwich. It's amazing.
Ho, 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 it's magic, you know. Never believe it's not so. It's magic.
Yes,
you know.
magic. Yeah. I got to tell you, I cannot wait. I cannot wait for the 2016 election. I can't wait for the for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I can't wait for the Republican idiocy. I really wanted Romney to come back, though. I did. I got to be honest, so I could have another Wawa moment. He's at the Wawa pushing the little funny thing. It's magic. You push the button, you get a sandwich. You know, no workers in the back, none of that stuff. Nobody actually did the work. It was just magic. It's amazing. I push a button, I get what I want. And speaking of pushing a button and getting what you want, Rick Scott, the governor of Florida, all the way up here in Pennsylvania, has been in Philly yesterday, today, on a job-stealing junket on the taxpayers' dime there in Florida. He announced yesterday the big coup. Evidently, Wawa is going to open up, I guess, 20, 25 stores down there in Florida. Big coup. Stole those from Pennsylvania. Yeah. I wonder how much money the state of Florida. I shouldn't even put it that way. I should wonder how many broken hearts and broken dreams and child's tears are going to go into funding Wawa coming to Florida because kids aren't going to have an education. Because I just got to wonder. But anyway, here to talk a little bit about the big job-stealing junket, our good friend John Newrohr, Communications Director over at Keystone Progress. John, thanks for taking time for us.
That's great. It's good to be with you again, Rick. You really told a lot of the story there already, and you're absolutely right about this. Basically, the jobs piracy. I think we should start calling Rick Scott the jobs pirate, and I think that would make for some fantastic photoshops.
That would be. I mean, he's already Skeletor.
Well, he's following for the context of this. He's following in the footsteps with this jobs pirating tour of his good buddy Rick Scott from Texas. Rick Perry from Texas. They're one and the same in a lot of ways. Rick Perry went on a similar kind of jobs pirating tour to states like Illinois, Maryland, Connecticut, New York, blue states, where he thought, he could go and try to convince people to come to Texas. And in reality, what Rick Perry was doing and what Rick Scott is also doing is conveniently getting out of the state at a time when they are embroiled in scandal.
Right.
So I think that's an important part of the context here. And, not to get too far down in the weeds with what's happening in Florida, but in Florida right now, the scandal du jour is that the head of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, who was a 35-year veteran, a very well-respected public servant in Florida, had to suddenly resign his post, and he was appointed by Rick Scott for this post a few weeks back. And as it turns out, he was given an ultimatum by some of Rick Scott's staffers, which is you either retire or you are we're going to fire you. And the reason for that, as it turns out, is that they were asking him to do all of these very unethical things with the power that he has at the post, being the head of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, trying to make some charges go away for political friends, trying to get him to do election work when he's on state time doing his actual job. So there are a whole bunch of things that he ended up talking to a few reporters about. And that's the scandal that's happening right now. Conveniently, Rick Scott finds his way up to Philadelphia to get out of Florida for a couple of days and in the middle of when this scandal was really heating up.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you would go to a place that's freezing cold, like Philadelphia. But it's interesting you bring up a governor embroiled in the scandal. Did he have anything? Was it as bad as throwing 90,000 black people off the voting rolls like Jeb Bush did back in 1990 or back in 2000? Does it rise to that level of malfeasance?
I wouldn't say that it's that bad, but I would say that it is a symptom of the same problem, which is that you get in office, you get power, and you think you can get away with anything.
Right.
And he is one of the most unpopular governors in the history of the state of Florida, as polling shows right now. He just won re-election in 2014.
And that's the thing I was going to ask you. How is it possible this guy won re-election? Other than I thought Charlie Crist was a horrible candidate. I mean, I don't know how you get somebody who's a Republican and a Democrat, and an independent, and who knows where he's at. Can't you come up with a real candidate?
Well, right. Charlie Crist is certainly, I think a retread candidate, and that's a phrase that it puts it nicely, I think. But that's a symptom. That's another whole show's worth of conversations about turnout and off-year elections. Yeah. And I think that's the bottom line there, because polling showed that he was pretty unpopular leading up to the election in 2014. Also, was still able to win re-election. So at that point, you're invincible, right? You think you're invincible. You look at the polling numbers and you still win re-election, and you think, I can do anything I want. I can try to make my political appointees do election work on the state time. I can get my friends out of criminal investigations, and I can hop up to Philadelphia whenever I want and poach jobs and bring them down to Florida, which, as you pointed out, by the way, is not exactly looking like what the result of the trip is going to be. Anyways, you said he did a press conference yesterday with the CEO of Wawa, and yes, they're opening up 20, 25 new stores in Florida. They were already in Florida, by the way, so these are just new stores. And then when somebody asked, okay, well, so are you moving your corporate headquarters, from Eastern PA down to Florida? And he said, well, no, and we're actually expanding here in Pennsylvania at our headquarters. So that's not exactly the narrative that Rick Scott was trying to weave when he talked about what he was going to be able to accomplish by coming up to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and that's a whole conversation for another day as well, that Wawa wouldn't leave because, look, they get a lot here too. My question, though, is, how many broken dreams and how many children's tears did Florida give up to get those jobs? Because, look, they've got convenient type stores down there. They've, I don't know, Piggly Wiggly and, all Winn-Dixie or whatever. They've got those things down there. How much did Wawa extract out of the state of Florida for those jobs, for those stores?
Well, yeah, I mean, Florida has the second most unfair state and local tax system. Pennsylvania's not much better, by the way. Pennsylvania, on this list I'm looking at, Pennsylvania is the sixth most unfair. And basically, in essence, what that means is that lower income families, working class families in Florida are taking on a lot more of the burden than businesses. So, the numbers I'm looking at, that low-income families in Florida pay 7 times the tax rate that the top 1% does. And that's because of all of these loopholes. And, which Governor Scott was touting on his trip here, all the loopholes that you can enjoy in sunny Florida. But what that means, though, is that means drastic cuts to education, drastic cuts to infrastructure spending, and Florida's education system, their public education system, is ranked in the bottom half of the country. You look at sort of hourly wages, for example, and while Rick Scott's been governor, giving all of these, loopholes and giveaways to the corporations down there, the hourly wage has fallen by more than $1 per hour. And so they ranked 49th out of 50 states in wage growth since he's been governor. So not only are you giving these loopholes to the businesses and then cutting education, cutting infrastructure because the state doesn't have enough money, but on top of that, these giveaways to these companies is not resulting in the trickle down that Governor Scott ascribes to, and it's not the working class folks in Florida are not benefiting.
Yeah, but haven't we learned that beggar thy neighbor economic development scheme just doesn't hold water? It doesn't work. And I think the perfect example, outside of Florida is Missouri and Kansas. They've been embattled in this fight to give away their children's future and huge tax breaks to corporations to move across the street from Kansas City, Missouri to Kansas City, Kansas. And it just hasn't benefited the people. It's just people realigning along the border, stealing a bunch of tax money.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be a good guest right now because I'm going to say I don't have an answer for that. It's mind blowing that it's the definition of an insanity to try the same thing over and over again and get the same result and then keep trying it. And it's not working and it hasn't worked. And the thing is, if you talk to mainstream economists, they will tell you that it doesn't work. And they tell you that the best way to grow the economy is to invest in the working class folks, because they're going to take the money that you put back in their pockets and they're going to spend it again.
Yep.
And they're going to grow businesses because they spend money because they have to. And what you have in Florida is another example of the one percenters. You have these large businesses that are getting these loopholes, making record profits, and they're sitting on it. They're sitting on the money, and it's happened over and over and over again. But for whatever reason, and one of those reasons, like I said before, that we can have a long conversation about is turning out for elections in off years, which is critical. But states are trying these kinds of trickle down economic strategies over and over again, and it's not working.
No, it didn't work 30 years ago. It's not going to work now. It's not going to work next year. Stop. At some point, stop. Just stop. So let me get back to Rick Scott. So are we labeling this junket a failure at this point, or it was just because I got to be honest, my first thought when I heard about this is just a political ploy. I didn't really know about the scandal going on down in Florida, and that makes perfect sense. Get out of Dodge while it's hot. But I got to be honest, I thought it was just a PR stunt to attack the governor here, the new governor, Tom Wolf, and to push that right-wing kind of message even further in Philadelphia, where, the right-wing message, isn't as strong as maybe the center of the state is.
Well, I really don't get the political strategy here. I'm not sure if, it's one thing for a terrible governor like Scott Walker, who has,
presidential
political aspirations beyond just Wisconsin, to be going to a place like Iowa and to go to a place like New Hampshire, and he's doing that. I just don't see what the political future is for somebody like Rick Scott. But I don't know. I guess if you feel like you can get away with anything, then you also feel like you can do anything. And so maybe there are some personal political aspirations that are part of the reason why he's trying to come to a blue state like Pennsylvania. But I'm just not sure. I mean, to your original question about whether this is a success or a failure for him, well, Wawa was already going to open 20 stores. I mean, that was decided well before this trip to Philadelphia for Governor Scott. They were already in Florida. They're opening new stores. But nothing, none of the meetings that the governor had up here were, resulted, at least as far as we know, in any commitments for companies to actually leave Pennsylvania and go to Florida. So I'm not quite sure. Maybe he wanted to see some snow on the ground, and so in that case, success. I mean, you got the freezing cold and you got some snow.
There you go.
But as far as bringing jobs from Pennsylvania to Florida, when the economics just don't add up, it certainly is not a success.
Yeah, I'm hoping his political future. I hope he's elected president of Cell Block C. That would be nice to see. There you go, John. I appreciate you taking time for us. Always great talking with you. I look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too, John Neurohr, Communications Director over at Keystone Progress, KeystoneProgress.org. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on John's name, take you right there. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
We don't take up the box. We know it's full of precious pudding. Let's open the locks, and then we'll say, hooray! You're our ability. Being a pirate is always a game. Do what you want, cause a pirate is free. You are a pirate. You are a pirate. You are a pirate. We are sailing away. Adventure waits on every shore.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1919. the U.S. Congress passed the child labor tax law. At the turn of the 20th century, child labor had increasingly become an issue of concern in the United States. In 1890, the census found more than 1 million children between the ages of 10 and 15 in the workforce. By 1910, that number had exceeded 2 million working children. Many of these children worked long hours in unhealthy conditions for low wages. Progressive activists led campaigns to bring national attention to the plight of these working children. As a result, many individual states passed limits on children's work. Nationally, there was no uniform legislation. Southern lawmakers were unwilling to push for child protections because local factory owners insisted child labor was necessary if Southern businesses were going to compete with manufacturers in the North. The state laws that did exist were poorly enforced, especially in Southern states. In 1909, a survey of South Carolina mills found that nearly 92% of them were violating what little child labor regulations were in place. In 1916, the U.S. Congress attempted to regulate child labor, but a federal judge ruled that legislation unconstitutional. Undeterred, Congress tried again in 1919. They passed a law that said companies in certain industries would face a 10% tax on their profits for hiring child labor. The act defined child labor as any worker under the age of 16 in any mine or quarry and under the age of 14 in any mill, cannery, workshop, factory, or manufacturing establishment. Within a few years, the Supreme Court found that law unconstitutional. In an 8-1 decision, the court ruled that Congress could not use taxes to enforce regulatory power. Although it was only in effect briefly, the child labor tax law did cause a downturn in the use of child labor. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been talking about the 21st century proliferation of terrorism and learning more about the tactic. One important thing we've learned is that terrorist acts rarely lead to their ultimate goal. Occasionally there are some successes, but over the long haul it has proven to be ineffective. So why are there still attempts? Well, it's normally used by those who have no other strengths. They can't conquer with education, big numbers, better technology, or any other method. That is certainly true with those who act alone, those we today call lone wolves. American terrorists Timothy McVeigh and Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, could only get themselves heard by causing dramatic and deadly acts, and it has been going on for centuries. There just hasn't been color TV and an internet available to let us know about it. Join us again for America's most deadly and long-lasting terrorist group prior to 9/11. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen! Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME...
Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you.
Because I'm crazy.
Clap along if you feel
Yeah, crazy. Crazy. Gotta love Idaho. Idaho seems to be the next crazy place on the list. Guy named Vito Barberi. Vito's a 63-year-old state representative there in the great state of Idaho, home of the potato. During a hearing on this anti-abortion bill, gotta love this, and I know I do. The attorney and state representative asked the woman doctor about the use of this camera that they use in colonoscopies. Evidently, and I didn't know it. this whole idea that colonoscopies can be done by drugs. I guess there's a risk of a colonoscopy. Can it be done by drugs? And the doctor says it cannot be done by drugs. It can, however, be done remotely. You swallow a pill. There's a little camera. The camera makes its way through your intestines. These images are then uploaded when the doctor, who sees thousands of miles away, and interprets it. So, basically you swallow this pill, the camera takes pictures, and someone in India reads it. So this Idaho state representative asks, can the same procedure be done? And don't laugh, because he was serious, so stop. Can this same procedure be done in pregnancy? Swallowing a camera and helping the doctor determine the situation with the child. Now, he was serious about that. For the men in the room, because I know women know better. You do know enough about the anatomy, right? That the mouth is not connected to the childbearing area, right? We do know that. Well, the doctor was very nice, and she said it cannot be done in pregnancy simply because when you swallow a pill, it would not end up in the vagina. But no, which a roarious laughter breaks out through the room, and where the good state representative, the good 63-year-old man who you would think would know better, said, "Fascinating. That certainly makes sense, doctor." Yeah. Now, this is the legislation this guy's pushing for because, of course, he knows what's best. He knows what's best for women. And just to prove that it's not only men who are stupid in Wisconsin or in Idaho or crazy. Idaho Republican and the good woman, Christy Perry. She's a representative there in the good state of Idaho. She's pushing back against this idea that state government should say, if a child's deathly ill, and this just makes sense to me. Look, have your crazy religious beliefs, believe in the spaghetti monster, believe in, whatever, believe in whatever it is you need to believe in to get you through the day. I wish that religion was used to make us better people, that we would aspire to be something better. And I know many, many people, most people, religion makes them a better human being. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing for society, whether you believe in religion or not. I'm not saying one way or another, but generally you aspire to be a better human being, to be a better neighbor, a better family, a better, whatever. You aspire to higher aspirations, to be, to try and emulate Christ or whatever it is that you believe. There are some who are just plain nuts. And and I'm not leaking on anyone's on religion or anything, but at the end of the day, if your kid is ill and a simple antibiotic could save their life, this idea of God's will is kind of ludicrous to me. And I've always said that, look, if you don't want to take it, I don't believe that government should say you have to take it. If you want to claim that religious freedom stuff for you, go ahead. It's on you. And you'll never hear me say, no, you have to take the pill. No, you do whatever the hell you want. As long as you're an adult, you've made those choices, that's on you. But when you're talking about children, and your child or anybody's child, I think there has to be someone who's sane and rational who says, look, we're not going to allow that to happen. Well, here, this state representative, Christy Perry, she went on to say, children do die. Not to sound callous, she says, but reformers want to act as if death is an anomaly. It's not. It's a way of life. She goes on to say, as you move out west, we tend to be more independent people, and Idaho is a lot like that. Because evidently her district's pretty anti-government. She says followers of Christ do not look at the government to help them at all. They are very self-sufficient. They know how to care for themselves. In her county, in Canyon County, people feed their families. They fish, they hunt, they do all of that stuff. And that's great. I'm all in favor of that. She says that these parents are comfortable by the fact that they know their child is in heaven if they die from whatever illness it is. If I want to let my child be with God, why is that wrong? And that's pretty twisted, honestly and truthfully. Especially when you could say God's will gave us the ability to have antibiotics. It's just kind of crazy. And this whole really bizarre right-wing religious kind of zealotry. I was just reading an article, earlier today about the homeschool movement and how you've got these fringes, and not even the fringe, because most people I talk to who homeschool, they homeschool because of religious stuff. Wow, it's morality. We're going to shelter our kids from life. But some of them go even further. This one case, the woman had actually been recessed so far from society. She had no birth certificate, no social security, no medical history. Nobody knew anything about her. She was illegal. She was really an undocumented illegal alien. Nobody knew she existed. And she couldn't attend college. She couldn't buy a house. She couldn't rent a car. She couldn't do anything. She could do nothing. And, she went online to try and, get people to go, hey, I exist. I'll be over here. And you hear all of these weird, bizarre stories of these religious zealots who are doing these things to kids, which at some level, look, I'm not one to say government should rush in to intervene in the family, but you know what? Some of this stuff is nuts. And you look at some of the other stories that were in this, families arranging marriages. Again, we're going back to that. And in fact, the one story I read, the family actually discounted the daughter, discounted her because she was somehow damaged. And you go, really? They were asking $25,000, smaller than the $50,000 that they had wanted, because she had been molested as a child. And she was considered by her Christian community to be damaged goods. These are the religious people, the forgiving folks. Scary, very, very scary. Quick break, right back.
They laid their future plans. They saw that food was everything to man. And maybe then they had a thought to help the poorest folks, but it only brought more money to their hands. And the more keep getting poor, people turn away, not equal to admit the way they planned. It's taking all the soul away from everything they grew. They can't find the legs on which to stand.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
Some say the blast sounded like a bomb and felt like an earthquake.
Another day, another oil explosion, this time at Exxon refinery in California.
The intelligence assessment describes some anti-pipeline and anti-oil sands activists as violent extremists.
Anti-petroleum activists are a security threat, says Canada. January 2015, the second hottest January on record, plus
the best idea we ever had. Our belief that the country's most special places should belong not just to the rich, not just to the powerful, but belong to everybody.
President Obama designates 3 new national monuments.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Just one more day of oil in trouble.
Yep. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, earlier this week we reported there were 2 oil train derailments in North America. We need to issue a correction. In fact, there have been 3 in the past week.
Yes.
And just as I predicted, by the way, as the fire is still smoldering in West Virginia from that huge oil train explosion out there, Keystone XL pipeline proponents are once again claiming that this is why we need to build the pipeline. Here's Fox News, of course.
Proponents of Keystone XL say their pipeline would get oil to market cheaper and far safer than the trains.
Now, in fact, oil transport by train has exploded in this country, pardon the pun. Back in 2008, there was only about 10,000 train cars. Now, as of 2014, about 500,000 of these oil train cars are crisscrossing the country. So, wouldn't it be safer to build the pipeline?
No, you're right. Oil train traffic has increased 4,000%. But as far as total amount of oil spilled, pipelines still spill about 3 times more.
So even though shipment by oil bomb train has boomed over the past 6 years, as far as the environment goes, pipelines are still far more dangerous.
Overall, yeah.
Someone needs to tell Fox News. I'm sure they're waiting to hear it. And speaking of oil explosions, what do you have for us today, Desi?
Well, for the second time in a week, the oil industry was involved in a major explosion and fire near people's homes. A huge explosion on Wednesday destroyed sections of a 100-year-old Exxon refinery in Torrance, California.
How old?
107 years.
And it's still in operation.
Yes.
Giant flames visible for miles, the ground shaking felt for miles as well. An explosion rocked this Torrance refinery, ripping apart structures and crushing cars.
Only minor injuries were reported. 13 schools near the refinery were ordered to shelter in place for several hours because what else are they going to do? Air quality was affected, but officials said it stayed within acceptable limits. The explosion measured the equivalent to a 1.7 earthquake on the Richter scale. The cause of the blast is still under investigation.
Here's the cause. Oil blows up. Just saying.
In Canada, a leaked intelligence memo from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police calls Indigenous tribes and environmentalists who oppose oil and gas development a growing threat to Canada's national security.
The intelligence assessment describes some anti-pipeline and anti-oil sands activists as violent extremists.
The January 2014 report lumps all groups against the oil industry together, describing them as a highly organized and well-financed anti-Canadian petroleum movement.
See, I knew you were a terrorist.
They call them anti-Canadian. Canada's Conservative Harper administration is currently pushing to expand broad anti-terror legislation to include anybody who interferes with, quote, critical infrastructure or the economic and financial stability of Canada, and even allows preventive detention of people who might do something.
It's long been said, when the U.S. sneezes, Canada catches a cold. It sounds like Canada has caught the flu. I'm sorry, Canada.
And disturbingly, that secret memo also questions the science on global warming.
Naturally.
Here in the U.S., the FBI is ramping up monitoring of anti-Keystone XL pipeline activists at their homes and workplaces.
Oh, hello, FBI.
Meanwhile, the planet is still warming. After 2014 clocked in as the hottest year on record, the month of January in 2015 was the second hottest January on record, according to NASA and NOAA.
Those liars.
President Obama this week used his executive authority to protect 3 new national monuments from development for all Americans. Browns Canyon National Monument in Colorado, Hanaolioli Internment Camp in Hawaii, and the Pullman Historic District of Chicago, prompting one congressional Republican to call him King Obama.
Of course he did. As Obama himself noted,
conservation is a truly American idea.
Yeah, back when we had Republicans like Teddy Roosevelt and, even Richard Nixon.
Yeah, back when conservatives actually believed in conservation.
For much more on those stories and all of them that we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, and iTunes, where we hope you will give us a good review, and that helps other people find our reports easier. Find us and follow us on the Facebook and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Is this land made for you and me? This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island. From the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
I got news for you. It's going down. Before you come home and tell me you're not angry, and I'll be leaving town.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Hopefully tomorrow Rick Scott takes his carpet bagging with him and his poaching bag, and it still blows my mind. Coming all the way to Pennsylvania to announce that yes, Wawa is going to open up 20 stores in Florida that they were going to open up anyway. I'm still wondering how much money it's going to cost the state of Florida to get those 20 stores. Just kind of a thought. But I'll be happy when Skeletor takes his bag of tricks back to Florida and faces the music, so to speak. Anyway, here to find out what's going on around the world and in Washington, D.C., I've got Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So I understand the president vetoed the dreaded Keystone XL pipeline.
Well, he did, and he didn't make a lot of fanfare about it. But there's something I do want to point out, because I really tried to read very carefully, and I don't want to try to read more than is not there. But here's the one line when the president says, the presidential power to veto legislation is one I take seriously. But I also take seriously my responsibility to the American people. And because this act of Congress conflicts with established executive branch procedures, meaning his ability, and cuts short through consideration of issues that could bear on our national interest, including security, safety, and environment, it's earned my veto. So he says because it cuts short through consideration of issues. The other reason I mention this, Rick, is because it's what I'm not hearing. I didn't hear the president say this is an environmental nightmare. I haven't heard him say this really isn't going to create jobs. And what I'm trying to point to here is I'm not sure this is over with completely. And I think that the environmental movement knows that. There's a missing piece yet coming from the State Department. So the president's vetoing this based on congressional overstepping. I'm just not so sure this is dead as an issue.
Right. No, to be honest, nothing with this president seems to be dead as an issue other than the middle class.
Yeah, so I think that the environmental movement and the progressive movement and those who believe this thing is not, is not a good thing are going to read this, I would assume, the same way I'm reading it. That's what I was more interested in today, was what he didn't say.
Yeah, I got a number of emails from folks, this in a very kind of celebratory way. Yeah, we won. Yay, we won. I don't know what we won because it's going to come back. Look, this is what the moneyed interest want. They're going to figure out a way to get what they want one way or another. Or am I wrong?
No, you're right. And I researched 2 cases on this just out of curiosity, and I was shocked. I didn't realize this. Eminent domain is occurring on this pipeline in our country. It's occurred in Nebraska and Texas.
Right.
The Texas landowner said there's nothing they can do about it. Nebraska actually has it in court. The governor and TransCanada that owns this thing,
yes,
they have the right under Nebraska law. They have the right. The governor and TransCanada has the right to just say, we're taking your land.
Yeah, and that's what the Nebraska State Supreme Court said too. And there are a handful. I think there are 9 holdouts in Nebraska. And the rest of them have just gone, we don't have the money to fight it. And basically said, we're going to bend over. I mean, because that's basically what's going on here.
Well, what am I missing? Why are they continuing with eminent domain if the issue hasn't been solved about that pipeline? Is there something just domestically that?
Yeah, no, I fully expect that, it's gonna go through. I fully expect that at some point, even if it's done in the dark of night, they're going to figure out a way to get what they want.
There's such big money behind this.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems that that's how things end up working out, and they'll figure it out one way or another. There'll be an enticement there one way or another, because they wouldn't be spending all of this money if they didn't think it was going to happen.
Right. Yes, I just wanted to mention in the veto message.
Good. I'm glad. But I mean, it's a short-term victory, I guess. But you're right. It will be back. Let's take a look at Iran. I guess minutes away from the bomb, huh?
Well, Netanyahu in 2012 had a chart, Prime Minister of Israel, and of course right now he's in a battle with the White House, and he's in a battle of his life in Israel. He's dead heat in the polls. And he warned that it was imminent within months. Well, there's been, Edward Snowden is not the only leak. There was a huge leak of all kinds of fascinating information, foreign information this week, and one of them was an issue where Mossad, some statements, and Mossad is the Israeli CIA equivalent, except it's really, really efficient.
Right.
And Mossad said at the time when Netanyahu was warning this was all months away, Mossad was saying, well, no, it's not. It's not imminent about Iran. So it's very fascinating to see the timing of this and the fact that Mossad is in a disagreement with Netanyahu at that time, combined with the fact that at the press club today, and nobody will talk about this, Ali Reza Jafarzadeh, who is a paid Fox News contributor, spoke at the press club today. He denied he was head of an Iranian resistance group called MEK when I actually attacked him for it. He denied that he was ever head of it. He said to me, that group's in Iraq. Well, today he's the deputy director of that group, and he spoke today, and he's saying about a secret door in Iran, and of course Fox News is carrying that. And so you have him popping up all of a sudden. So it's, and that's against the president, President Obama.
Right.
So you have all of this inside political maneuvering, and you can just see that the neocon right are salivating to drop some bombs somewhere, and Iran's the target. So they're trying to do everything on earth to sabotage the president, our president.
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking about Mossad and Netanyahu, I'm thinking back to 2001, 2002. I'm thinking about where was our CIA to go? No, Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction. I mean, to me, that's really ballsy.
Oh, it is, and so now you have the fact that that the intelligence agency of Israel said no, they aren't within a month away. Their enrichment level is 20%. They get to 90%. They're dangerous. And I'm not saying that it's not to be looked at, but now we are surely finding out that, everybody makes these statements about weapons of mass destruction and imminent death, and it's just not always correct.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is we knew Hussein had weapons of mass destruction because we gave them to him.
We gave them to him.
I mean, because you know that, right?
Rumsfeld did.
And they were east, north, west, south of Tikrit. We knew exactly where they were, although we never really found them. So I guess there's that. I got to be honest. I'm thrilled that someone is of sane mind to not get us back into another conflict, another war, and I definitely don't want one with Iran.
Yes, and we have been pushed. I mean, Dick Cheney, no question about it. He wanted to go into Iran as he went into Iraq. Some people said that he told Bush go into Iran, and Bush misspelled it. A-K-I-R-A-N. And we ended up where we ended up. And now it's like history repeating itself with this national resistance, who, by the way, paid Rudy Giuliani $100,000 to come talk to them in France and endorse them when they were an official terrorist group.
Wow.
I guess, yes, that's a fact.
But he loves his country, though, Bob. He loves his country more than Obama does.
Now, Rudy loves money to the point where he sat next to an official terrorist who was head of the group that took our hostages and who assassinated Americans, and he took their money to brag about them.
How come we don't hear about that on Fox News?
Oh, you don't. And like this Ali Reza Jafarzadeh, who denied, Fox came out and said, oh, what Bob Ney's saying is old news because I attacked this guy. Oh, that's old news. And then he said he wasn't even part of the group. Well, I had his card. He was director. They raided his house in Virginia, the FBI did. And he was a Fox News contributor.
Wow.
You won't hear that story anywhere but on your show right now.
Yeah. Well, it's because they love America. Money. Yeah. They love American money.
Although Rudy Giuliani has really, it really has created a turning point for the Republican Party. Now it's become about, well, do you support Rudy Giuliani or not? And some of the smart Republicans are actually saying, oh, this is just, disgusting. But, it's become a litmus test. Do you support Rudy or not? Which is just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I don't. Sorry. Not going there. And finally, the clock doth tick. And while we're talking about, while they're thumping their chest and saying we should be bombing Iran, we may not have a Department of Homeland Security to let us know if it's coming back.
Yes, this was the most ill-conceived, move by Speaker John Boehner and the House Republicans. They ended up taking the Homeland Security, holding it hostage. They passed everything else. And they said, oh, we got you, Mr. President. We're going to twist you in the wind with your immigration policies. Then it passes. It goes to the Senate. The Senate turns around under the Republicans, and they say, well, no, we think we'll have a clean bill. Now, they tried 4 times to coerce Democratic votes, which the Senate couldn't get. And so now they have a clean bill going to the House. So John Boehner and the Republicans in the House, Rick, have to make a fundamental decision. Let it all shut down by Friday, or pass a clean bill. I mean, there's no negotiating with the White House.
Nope.
Because what is there to negotiate? You're either going to shut it down or you aren't.
Right. So, but I mean, you personally got to be thrilled that John Boehner's tripping over his little John.
Well, I wrote 2 years ago in my book extensively about him, not because I hate John Boehner and not because I had this passion. You know, he's number 3 in line for the presidency. And I felt people had a right to know that legislatively, forget everything else, legislatively, he can't move a glass across the table if you tell him to. And this is a guy, and he's kind of proven himself. And it's sort of like I told you so. The guy just he doesn't get it. And I mean, this is if the Democratic side can get a mantra together that does a few things for the average working people and really is of substance, etc. I mean, the Republicans have really, Rick, stayed in here by luck and the Koch brothers' money.
Yeah, no, I keep saying what we need is a militant labor movement again. And we need to have a Democratic Party that gets their head out of the sand and out of their keisters.
Yeah, so it's, right now we'll just see what the House Republicans do, but they're in a box, a dangerous one.
We will see. When does this end? The end of the month?
On Friday.
Friday. Tick-tock. So we got something to keep an eye on.
Yes, sir.
Bob, always great talking with you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Rick.
Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
From Lisbon, Portugal, this is your World in 2 for Tuesday, February 24th, 2015. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service.
Jack Straw from Wichita got his money down.
That Jack Straw, the fictional character of Grateful Dead lore, was a man on the run, an escaped convict that eventually turned on and killed a fellow escapee. But there's also a real Jack Straw, a British MP, and he's now caught up in a legal scandal of his own. Straw of the minority Labour Party, as well as Malcolm Rifkind of the ruling Conservative Party, have both been implicated this week in a Cash for Access probe launched by the British broadcaster Channel 4 and the Daily Telegraph. A reporter posing as a businessman approached both men to inquire about obtaining political favors in exchange for cash, and both lawmakers quoted daily rates of over $7,500 for their help. Nick Maxwell is the research manager for Transparency International UK.
One of the issues we've found with a wide range of lobbying scandals or issues which bring into question parliamentary ethics is that a lot of the behaviour can actually take place within the rules.
Both Straw and Rifkin were suspended from Parliament yesterday, and Rifkin announced today that he'll step down voluntarily. But Straw, who's not seeking re-election in May, maintains he did no wrong, since he intended to help out the businessman after leaving Westminster. What's more, the Telegraph reported yesterday that upon leaving office, Straw will join the board of an office furniture company that he lobbied on behalf of while in office. According to new 2010 rules, ministers can't lobby directly for 2 years after leaving their posts, but that doesn't apply to the average MP.
The issue of the revolving door, when ministers or public officials move from their official roles outside into the private sector, is one of our key corruption risks. And what we see is that very, very common in the UK system.
It turns out Washington isn't the only place where money unlocks influence, and the law always seems to be a step behind. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
The GOP-led House of Representatives has proudly achieved a historic legislative record. A record in futility, that is. Also in absurdiosity. In February, for the 56th time, they focused the entire array of brain cells in their 245-member majority on an effort that would directly harm millions of Americans, namely the repeal of Obamacare. Yes, the nincompoop caucus has now wasted Congress's time and credibility by voting not once, not 10 or 20 times, but 56 times to take away even the minimal level of health coverage for previously uninsured people. But wait, it's possible that I misstated that number. It seems that House Speaker John Boehner's team has been so overcome by its passion for eliminating health care that they lost track of how deeply they've disappeared into the woods of right-wing fantasy land. A recount reveals that instead of taking 56 wild potshots at the program, they've actually held 67 votes on it. Meanwhile, the Obamacare program that the Boehner bunch is working so feverishly to kill, even though it's modeled directly on programs previously introduced by such Republican stalwarts as Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich, turns out to be working better than anyone, even its proponents, thought it would. And to the tooth-grinding dismay of the Kill Obamacare crowd, Americans like it. Naysaying Congress critters had scoffed from the start that no one would buy into the program. But on the deadline day for this year's sign-up, which came only 2 weeks after the House's 67th vote for repeal, a record number of people joined. That means 11.5 million Americans who had no coverage before Obamacare now do. This is Jim Hightower saying, did I mention that the lawmakers who are trying so furiously to eliminate coverage for those people enjoy government-paid coverage for themselves?
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
No matter how hard you try, you can't stop us now.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Since the prehistoric ages and the days of ancient Greece, walk down to the Middle Ages. Planet Earth kept going through changes, and then the Renaissance came, and times continue to change. Nothing stayed the same, but there were always renegades. Like Chief Sitting Bull, Tom Paine, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, they were renegades. Of their time and age, so why they renegades?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. You know, it's interesting stuff there by Bob Ney. And, you know, I like Bob. He's one of these guys that, you know, got himself in a weird spot, but always, in my view, been a straight shooting guy. Did his time, you know, and came out, you know, someone with a different idea. And I got to be honest, I would love to see Bob run for Congress again. I know, you know, and look, I know he's had his history, but again, I think people change. I think they learn, and you know, this is what I think the Republican Party needs. They need people who are looking at their party, going, "Boy, you're screwed up." We need to come back to some sense of, you know, sense, just a little bit, and you know, this thing as he's pointing out with Netanyahu and the guy whose name I'm not even going to attempt to butcher, you know, Fox News all over it. You don't hear these kind of things on Fox News because it's not about news. And this is the thing that gets me. You know, what we're shown, everything on the magic box in our living room, all of the things that we hear are corporatized and sanitized. We rarely hear the full story of anything. So how do you really know anything? Unless you're able to do the research and do all this stuff. And who's got time for that? Sadly, we've got a media culture that's lied to us the vast majority of the times. You know, Ronald Reagan, you know, said, you know, the problem with our liberal friends is, you know, they know so much that's not, or I forget how it goes. You know, so much of what they believe is not. That's the reality of where we are. So much of what we're told, so much of what we take for granted is not reality. And, you know, for me, it's the idea is getting back to that grassroots, getting back to connecting with people again. And, you know, maybe social media is that vehicle, or maybe it's just back to, you know, knocking on neighbors' doors. We're going to have to see a major push of organizing. Because, look, I think a lot of people are starting to look around going, hey, the economy is recovering. We're told things are better, but they're not. And this is where, you know, as Bob pointed out, if the Democrats ever figured out a message, if they ever got their heads out of the sand and they ever decided that, you know, we're going to be the voice of the people, because you can't serve two masters. Honestly and truthfully, you cannot be the Wall Street handmaidens and then say, oh, yes, working people, we're going to help you. Sorry, it just doesn't happen. You can't be less bad than the other guy. And that's sadly what's happened to Democrats in a lot of areas. And gerrymandering has a lot to do with this. Voter turnout has an awful lot to do with it. But at the end of the day, you ask a Republican what the party stands for, and they will tell you. They believe in lower taxes, no matter what it means to the community. They believe in less government, no matter what it means to workers and consumers. They believe in smaller government. Smaller, smaller, smaller. And the smaller, the better. The less infringement on business and special interest, the better. But what does that mean for you and me? And on the other side, you have a very mixed, muddled message. Where is that strong voice of we're going to fight for, where there's going to be a chicken in every pot? Where's that voice? Well, we better find it. And they better find it. They better find it quick. Anyway, tomorrow on the program, a little bit more about what's going on in Wisconsin. Our guest hung up at the rally, I believe. We're going to try and get him back on the program to talk about what's going on there in Wisconsin with this no rights at work agenda. We're gonna push on. They're going to talk more about what's going on here in Pennsylvania because I think it's important that we look at what Scott Walker and Scott Wagner and Rick Scott, all the Scotts are doing in this country. Maybe we should just outlaw the Scotts. Just a thought. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming like the tidal flood beneath the lunar sway. Imperial, mysterious, and amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.